here, the Brown Act requires us to publish an agenda for a regular meeting 72 hours in advance of the meeting. Under limited exceptions, an item that does not get placed on the agenda before that 72-hour clock starts running can be called, but the Brown Act specifies a couple of things. One is that the legislative body, that is you, the City Council, must determine that there is a need for immediate action. Secondly, the City Council must determine that the need to take that immediate action came to your attention after the agenda was published. And also there is a 2/3 vote requirement for you to make those findings. So that means effectively 5 of you must make the decision to call this item. So as the mayor has indicated, there is a written request for a censure of the mayor that has been prepared, and the council member all of the council has copies of this. And the question is, do you as a council want to effectively place this item on the agenda and then discuss it like any of the other items on our agenda? I will tell you, as a city attorney, I have looked at this document that has been presented to all of you, and it is not my place to weigh in on the merits of what is in this document, but I will say that as I look at the document itself and I read it for what it says, and I take each of the statements at face value, I see 2 things. One is I see a discussion about conduct that has been going on for some time. And secondly, I see really a discussion that would go forward and deal with systemic issues, not just at this meeting, but for all future meetings in which the current council as it sits is constituted, and that is at least until the end of the year. So it is my professional opinion that the grounds for an urgency item to discuss this are not capable of being met. I do not believe that you could properly find that this is something that you can take up. And so it would be my recommendation that the council not take this item tonight, and that it schedule this for an appropriate discussion when all of the council members, including the mayor, can be present, and we can properly notice this as an agenda item. Mr. Huber is on vacation right now, but I have spoken with him, and I know that he shares my opinion about this subject. It is also his recommendation as the city attorney that the council not take the urgency item action, and that this be scheduled at some future time.
Thank you. Any questions or comments?
So if the council would like to agendize it, you would have to make a motion to do so, and it would have to be 5 of you that voted affirmatively.
Well, I make the motion that we agendize this. We've done plenty of talking about it, and I think it is an emergency with litigation that is probably pending.
I second that.
And so just so we understand, before you take the vote, if you do affirmative, if 5 of you are in favor of this motion, then the next step would be to decide where to put this on your agenda. But once it is placed on the agenda, it is an item that may be discussed like any other agenda item, which means that we would call the item, do an introduction of the item. Once the introduction has been done, then we would open it for public comment, take public comment, close public comment, and then it would come back to the council for deliberation. So I just want the council to make sure you understand that if you do put this on tonight's agenda as a council item for discussion, it will proceed like any other item.
So it's a public hearing?
It's not a public hearing in that the public hearings are publicly noticed in the newspaper a certain number of days in advance, but it is public in that the Brown Act says that the public has a right to comment on any item on an agenda before the action is taken on that item. And so we have to open up public comment on this item before you can formally act as a council.
Okay. Well, if that's the case, since it came out of closed session, we'll go ahead and deal with it now.
There is a motion on the floor,
right.
So unless there...
We have a second.
Okay, and a second.
There's a first and second. all votes are in. Does anybody wish to change their vote? Voting closed. Okay, so open this up.
So the motion carries.
So to open it up, who wants to have a discussion? I'm not quite sure
Well,
how this works.
My
so-
suggestion would be, Mayor, that you have the city attorney read the proposal, particularly since people in the audience wouldn't have any chance to have seen it yet.
And I agree. What I will do is essentially the staff report for this item will be me reading this one-page censure. And then what I would propose is that we have the public, anyone who wishes to speak, address the council, and then after that it will come back to council for deliberation. So the item, this is a document prepared as of today's date. It is entitled Oroville City Council Resolution for the Censure of Mayor Linda Dahlmeyer. Whereas the Oroville City Council assembled in open session finds by a vote of a majority of its members that the elected mayor of the city of Oroville, Linda Dahlmeyer, has engaged in conduct in open public meetings of the city council and in private with employees of the city of Oroville that violates the city of Oroville Code of Ethics applicable to elected and appointed public officials of the city of Oroville, to wit, Section 3, which states, quote, elected and appointed officials' conduct with city staff, subsection C, which provides, again, quote, elected and appointed officials should never express concerns about the performance of a city employee in public to the employee directly or the city administrator. Comments about staff performance should only be made to the city administrator through private correspondence or conversation. Whereas the city council finds that Mayor Dahlmeyer's public and private misconduct has violated the dignity of and disrespected individual members of the city staff and has fostered and created a hostile work environment for city employees. And whereas the city council finds that Mayor Dahlmeyer's public and private conduct with and statements to city employees is not consistent with the values and the code of ethics of the city of Oroville and are not in the best interests of the city, due to the fact that the mayor's misconduct has exposed the city to substantial risk of legal liability for significant monetary damages and public contempt, and has resulted in the city's loss of competent, experienced employees, resulting in disruption of the management and performance of the city's public business and service to the public. And whereas Mayor Dahlmeyer has falsely accused individual city council members in open public meetings of conspiracy and collusion against her, and whereas a majority of the city council has determined that the city can no longer tolerate the risks to the city's reputation, employees, and assets by failing to take this action permitted and required by the city's code of ethics and its legal duties as public trustees. Now, therefore, in consideration of the foregoing recitals, the majority of the publicly elected members of the Oroville City Council hereby adopts this resolution censuring Mayor Linda Dahlmeyer for the violation of the city's code of ethics and other misconduct cited above.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the city council before I open this up to the public? If anybody in the public wishes to speak on this, you'll have to fill out a blue slip. This item would be considered 3.1. Any questions or comments from the city council?
I'll make a comment. First of all, this resolution is intended to be preemptive and to prevent further possible liability. And I would like to remind people that the council has a right via the First Amendment to express our views. Secondly, the public has a right to know about the behavior of their elected officials. And we don't have a legal duty to defend wrongful conduct by a member of this council. However, we do have a responsibility to protect the city staff, and that is our intention.
Thank you. Anybody have a public card? Bill Bynum. And next, Bobby O'Reilly. Is it on?
Now it's on. Okay, thank you. I'm going to speak in support of the censure, and I have witnessed in many meetings that the mayor has berated, might be the word, but at least intimated that city staff were colluding and that they were setting things up. I especially remember the meetings on the cannabis situation, and I felt like not only that the mayor oftentimes will hijack the discussion and filibuster and try to sway opinions just from the bully pulpit. And that, to me, happened even at the last meeting, when the mayor would interrupt and I think misuse her position. So I'm speaking in favor of this. Thanks.
Thank you. Bobby O'Reilly and then Bill Spear.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, City Council. What a way to start off the evening tonight. So I'm just going to start real quick by saying that each
Can
and
you reset
every
the time? Sorry.
each and every city council meeting for I don't know the past how long has been recorded, and you can go back and watch on select few Facebook pages and the city page, I assume, as to the conduct of all of the city council members. I specifically took the liberty of watching last week's meeting from home, and I took notes as I was watching, and I don't recall what was just said, but that could be my ill recollection. I have indeed seen members of this council, and my non-agenda item card was going to cover this topic, as it is very disgusting and distasteful, the things that come out of members of this council during meetings to the public. There are 3 individuals who don't bicker with one another in open session. Those 3 individuals are sitting over here. One took the liberty, a meeting or 2 meetings later, after a topic was addressed, to make a point to bring something back up that would steer the pot. There has been collusion. There has been meetings of marijuana topics with certain individuals in town that some of us were made aware of that were off the books. Allegations weren't false. It is the duty, my understanding, of somebody who represents a city in this capacity to stand up for what is right, to call it like it is, to tell it like it is, and to do what is right. I have seen nothing less of our mayor in the amount of time that I've been coming and paying attention to city council meetings and being a part of the positive solution in our community. This is absolute ridiculous, to say the least. Some of you who voted for this tonight, for this topic to be on the agenda, needs to take a deep, hard look in the mirror and ask yourself if you're representing the city in a positive way to create a positive solution. I was told at a very young age, and I've lived by this for quite some time now, you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution, and I strive every day to be part of the solution, and I see our mayor as being part of the solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Billy Spear and then John Mitchell.
Good evening, City Council. I am totally against this. You just listened to the attorney say that from the paper that he read that he didn't see any basis for it, and you just ignore what his advice. And, you know, there's been this bickering and stuff going on for a long time. There's, you know, it's out of line right from the start of doing an emergency meeting. It's not an emergency. It's fighting and bickering. And our mayor has served our town for 8 years and stood up for what was right. In this big battles that's been going on in our city, she was the one standing up for obeying our federal laws. 5 of you completely ignored it because you don't agree with it. Not wanting to do things the way that they should be done by sending our congressmen to Washington to get the laws changed. No, you just completely ignore it. Just like you just completely ignored the attorney. You could have waited. There's a lot on the agenda tonight and put it on if you felt that heavily. But again, you just ignore the proper procedures. You ignore the rules. You don't care about half of the city and causing more division, more turmoil. This ain't fixing nothing. I'm honored to know our mayor. I'm honored to be able to speak in our city, to be able to serve our city. And I'm proud to call her my mayor. And Mr. O'Reilly was right about ways that people on this city council have ignored me when I talk. They don't even look at me. They just write. They got it down. So when I come up to talk, my opinion don't matter. You just act like I ain't even here. Pay no attention to me. And people do see the disrespect. And disrespecting our mayor is way out of line, and it's going to cause more division. It's going to cause more hurt. We need to learn how to work together. We need to learn how to love our neighbor. We need to learn how to do things in the right way to show our children and the next generations of this is how you do things properly. Yes, the attorney says this is the way to do it, then we listen to him and we take it into advice. And for our government, yes, if something's federally illegal, we don't just ignore it and obey the laws we want to. We get a thing together and send our congressmen to help get the laws changed. Thank you.
Thank you. John Mitchell.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. I as well, I'm completely against this. Listen, it's obvious to many of us that there has been a mission to undermine our mayor since these last elections when some of you took your seats at the City Council in every way that you can. I don't want to call this a political witch hunt because our mayor is not a witch. She's a great woman who's done a great job in this community for 8 years, and she is our duly elected mayor. And that deserves some respect, I believe, from the rest of the council, respect that she has not been given by many of you. The grand jury report was clear that the issues don't lie with one person, the issues lie with the whole. That you guys do not know how to get along and work together for the good of this city. You don't care what the community has to say. You won't let us vote on decisive issues. You don't care what our attorney has to say. You don't care what the federal government has to say. The only thing you care about is what you care about. At least when I disagree with some of our council members and mayors, they're willing to sit down at a table and have a discussion with me. Unlike others who, as soon as I walk into the room, they scatter. They block me on Facebook. When I've never come against you personally, I've only come against the issues. But if somebody comes against an issue that you feel strongly about, you come against them. And that's not right. You represent all of us. You represent this entire city. And let's face it, marijuana is what has split up this council, and it's what's dividing our city. And it's what it's going to continue to do. No matter what you think $300,000, $500,000 a year in extra revenue is worth what it's doing to this city? I don't think it is. There are many opportunities to bring good businesses here like Smart and Final that I had the privilege of walking into and seeing today. Beautiful store. Tried to talk to some of you about it while I was in there, but you wanted nothing to do with me because we disagree on one issue. This is not about one person. This is about a group of people who have been elected to represent our city, that over one issue are bringing division to this city. Your job is to look out for the best interests of this community. And I don't believe that that's being done any way, shape, or form. I believe this is completely politically motivated. I think it's time that you guys start listening to what your community truly has to say, what the attorney has to say, what the law has to say, and try looking out for what is truly in the best interest of this community. Divided. That's where we stand today. I stood up here a while back and I asked that we should hit a reset button, seeing where things were going. If you think this is going to help the city at all, coming against the mayor again, how many times have you done it in how many different ways? I would think that a bunch of grown, mature, respectable adults sitting on the dais of our city council would find a way to come together and to get along for the good of our city. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephanie? And if there's anybody else that wishes to speak, get your card filled out now because we're going to be moving on.
Hello. So the last time I was here, can you hear me? The last time I was here was on March 6th, and that was the day, that was Don Rust's last day as part of the city. And I spoke then about the fact that the mayor had created a hostile work environment, and that was the reason that we lost Don Rust and all of the priceless and really truly invaluable benefits that he brought to the city. And now I understand that we have lost Don Nevers. And so I am bringing up the exact same issue because people do not want to work where they are treated badly. They don't want to work where they are spoken to disrespectfully. They will continue to leave, and we will continue to lose all of the amazing people that we have come to rely on and depend on for the city to run and be functional, as functional as it can be. But when our mayor is literally sabotaging these relationships, this is not politically motivated. I like you as a person, always have. But the way that you are treating the staff is unacceptable. It has nothing to do with politics. We may disagree on marijuana, okay, but that does not mean that you have the ability to talk to people in such a way that they no longer even want to work for the city. You're not their boss. They are our servants. They're public servants. And regardless of, you know, a disagreement that you have with them, they have the right to have some peace of mind at work and not be harassed. And the underlying issue really truly is that if this continues to happen, we're just really truly wide open for lawsuits, which we cannot afford in any way, shape, or form. We can't even afford to fix our streets. So please do not misunderstand this as a politically motivated anything. It's purely a wish to keep people that are hardworking, very loyal to the city, to its members, to its citizens. And we don't want to keep having to rehire people. The learning curve is massive, and there's, you know, the salaries is one thing, but their knowledge base, the way that they help each other, the way that they help other city council members, the way that they help other staff, that you can't put a price on that. So this needs to stop.
Thank you, Stephanie. We have two last cards. We have John Miller George and Eric Smith. If you want to come to the podium, it doesn't matter. They just got handed here, so whoever wants to come up.
Well, I've attended a bunch of meetings and I haven't noticed anything. But it sounds like things are going on behind the scenes that most of us don't know about. That said, I want to discuss for a minute one of the things that makes American democracy great is the fact that we don't execute people we disagree with. That's only started coming up lately with the president we have right now, talking about throwing people in jail because they belong to another party, whatever. We might disagree about cannabis. We might disagree a lot about cannabis. But nobody has to be run out of town because of being on one side or the other. I would say that the mayor could be a little more even-handed. The last meeting, she was intentionally fuzzing the water about the effect of the marijuana tax ordinance, and she did it several times repeatedly. So nobody's perfect, but you know, with consultation and stuff, people can come together.
Thank you. Eric Smith, and we'll close public comment at this time, or comment.
Thank you, Mayor, Council, and John. You and I have great conversations at the end of the meetings, even though we are totally on opposite ends of the spectrum. I apologize. This is a little bit off topic, but it will be on topic. I was going to make this a part of, you know, the open comments, but I think it's apropos. The grand jury report states there is mistrust and misunderstanding among the current members of the City Council, leading to an unusual high level of dysfunction. I would like to add this carries over to the citizens as well. I believe this in part arises from a disconnect between who you say you are, that is, the council, and so therefore I'm declaring a censure on you and how you conduct the affairs of the city. This dais is represented by former law enforcement, social workers, educators, people that I would expect to look out for the folks. In the time that I've spent here, the spirit of condescension has frequently controlled the room. This results in the folks having little confidence in your leadership, and I'm going to unpack the recent events to make my case. You chose to hire SCI to draft and publicly sell the concept of opening the door to the pot industry. However, the consultant was held out as an impartial arbiter of the process. This is anything but true. In full disclosure, SCI stands to make a lot of money if Oroville steps into this industry. Why? Because they provide ongoing services to the city, such as video monitoring and the like. This makes the public meeting and stakeholder meeting to assist in ordinance drafting a farce that you all sponsored. You failed to provide a forum where real stakeholders who have an educated voice and opportunity to voice into this situation. For an example, Butte County Office of Behavioral Health has mountains of data and well-researched information that wasn't even considered by you. You weren't even interested in their opinion. They are major stakeholders, and they stand to be the county dramatically impacted by your decision, period. And you didn't even give them the time of day. After reading through some of their information, it was clear to me as a stakeholder in that meeting, we were sorely lacking information. So what's the result? What's the takeaway? The stakeholder participants, as a stakeholder participant, I hold you, the council, personally responsible for failing to properly bring to the table good data that is not wrought with bias by SCI. Here lies the problem. Real or not, your actions communicate an arrogance and disdain toward the folks. I feel that you want to lie the blame at the feet of the mayor, but you have not acted in accordance to your call, thus you have promoted the problem. It's easy to project the blame, and you know what projection is, on others, but these issues are a creation of the City Council. Come clean to your intentions, tell us why, and don't hide behind SCI. As a former officer, former educator, former social worker, if you want pot in the city and you don't like the mayor, just tell us, okay? But don't hide behind a farce, SCI. Thank you.
So we're going to move on from this agenda item this evening, and hopefully we can move on as a community and a council and start working together. We actually have not done the Pledge of Allegiance this evening, and I don't see any children in the audience, but will you please stand with me for the pledge?
Yeah, we have to. I'll give it back after.
Salute. Pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mayor, there actually was no action taken on
Yeah.
that item yet.
And I
So
apol-
that
Oh, sorry,
a
but
vote
let's-
will need, you can't,
there'd have to be a motion and a vote.
and a majority vote would have to be taken to actually adopt this document.
Okay. Looking for a motion to adopt the document that was just read?
I move that we adopt the resolution to censure the mayor for her behavior with staff that's been going on for several years.
Is there a second? Second. There's a first and second. Voting's open.
Do we,
Oh, public comment?
yeah, I was just wondering
Comment.
if city council comment before we fully go to this. If I can just say just a few words. As a city, we're going through some really tough times. I think that's pretty clear. Our staff is they're wearing many hats that they initially weren't signed up to wear. We all know the reality of the income for our city is low. Everybody's working bare bones. And it really comes down to, it's a stressful time as a city. And it's felt on the council, and it's felt in the halls for our employees. My main problem that I have with this, I think it's important to keep us as your council accountable. I don't have anything a problem with that. I do have a problem with just the way this is happening tonight. We have heard from our city attorney that this is not the proper way to go about this. I think it's, personally, I think it's unjust to lay all the blame at the feet of the mayor for the conditions in our community, for our city. You know, with continual layoffs and the competition between the public and private sector. I have not seen due process with any of the claims that are laid at her feet regarding these employees. I've said this in close, and I'll say it here. I really do believe that this is biased. I think that if this was something that was completely legit, I believe that there's a different way of going about it. In our United States of America, it's innocent until proven guilty, from my memory. And with that said, I'm not saying that we're all innocent. There are mistakes that I believe that many members of this council has made. And I wouldn't even throw myself on there and say that I'm innocent from making any mistakes. I've only been here for 2 years. We are human, and I believe that each one of us is worthy of at least having due process. So my main problem that I have with this is just, I see just bias, and the reason why I see that is because of, again, what's the reason for the absolute rush without going through proper procedures and investigation? Us being judge, jury, and executioner, I think is heartbreaking. This is a sad day for our community. So that's what I have to say.
Okay, there was
I'm
a
in
first
the
and second.
queue after Scott, but it's not working. I would just like to add that this is not about making mistakes. This is about a pattern of verbal abuse and creating a hostile work environment over the last 8 years. This has affected at least 2 individuals recently whose positions we still really haven't filled. And it was a huge hit for us. And something else that should be public record is a previous incident involving an employee cost the city $25,000 or $27,000 in legal fees because of the mayor. So please understand, this is not politically motivated. What we're trying to do is we are seriously looking out for the staff here because they have been under the gun. And, well, we could read Dawn Never's letter of why she had a problem, but I think that wouldn't work. But, yeah, there's plenty of evidence to that. So thank you.
Mr. Cole, I just want to clarify that when speaking about personnel and the items that were just brought up this evening, Is that allowed to be spoken from the public dais?
I can't stop any of you from saying what you're going to say because you're elected officials, and ultimately, as city attorney, I'm an advisor to you. It certainly is not in the best interest of the city to openly discuss personnel matters
Right.
that may lead to litigation if, only because if we are subject to litigation, then, you know, we're discussing items that could be used against us and could affect our ability to properly defend ourselves when there is a good faith basis to defend ourselves. So, you know, that's the only guidance I can give you. I can't tell you what to do, or I can't make you. I mean, I can tell you what you should do, but I can't make you do it. So, you know, I understand that based on the nature of the allegations in this letter, there is some discussion about some specific employees. It would be my request, and I believe Mr. Huber's request, that we not delve into the merits of that, and that if you need to reprove the mayor or any other member, you do so at a more general level.
As far as the matter of the litigation that cost the city $27,000, from what I have heard from private counsel, that should have been a matter of public record. We just found out about it last week. It should have been a matter of public record, okay, and I stand by that.
Okay. Anybody else? Well, I can certainly say this has been an interesting evening, but, you know, after serving for 8 years, I will say that even prior to my time, there have been even sitting council members here that have been involved in so-called investigations. And some were found guilty and some were not. And by making public comments about succession planning, that was one of the times that you're not found guilty. So I'm going to end that there because we need to move on. But there's been a first and a second, so voting's open. Thank you. All votes are in. Does anybody wish to change? Voting closed. Thank you. So we
And
have two.
The motion carries.
We have two presentations this evening. One is for the Community Choice Aggregation, Brian Ring, Butte County, and the second one is Cal Water Study, Mark Adams, North Star Engineering. We do have speaker request for the presentation on 4.2. So I just want to let you become aware that even though the presentations sometimes take a little bit longer, the public speakers are still limited to their 3 minutes. Thank you. Moving on to the Community Choice Aggregation. Come on up.
Make sure you turn it on and give it a try. It should work.
Yeah. We can always advance them.
You can always give us a nod if that doesn't work.
Okay. We'll just advance it.
Good evening, Mayor Delmeyer, Vice Mayor Goodson. My name is Brian Ring. It's a pleasure to be here. Good evening, council members. I'm the Assistant Chief Administrative Officer for Butte County. I came here this evening to brief you all on a project that we've been working on since August of 2017, and this is just frankly for information. The goals here tonight are quickly to talk about what is community choice aggregation, what are some of the potential risks and benefits of community choice aggregation, you know, this little background information, how we got to where we're at today, and certainly discuss the next steps that the county is looking to take with regards to community choice aggregation, and answer any questions that I may be able to answer. And certainly I don't know everything on this subject, so if there's questions I can't answer, I'm happy to look into those as well.
What should I do to put it back on? Staff, right?
There we go. All right, back in business. All right, so community choice aggregation, it was the ability to have a CCA or community choice aggregation was back in 2002 when Assembly Bill 117 was passed. And what it does is it allows cities, municipalities to actually procure your own energy on the open market and then sell that energy back to your residents. But there's a critical partnership that remains with the investor-owned utility, which in Butte County's case is PG&E. What it does is it allows if a CCA is formed, it allows a local entity to choose, okay, what type of power do I want to purchase? Do I want to, some entities down in Southern California, the Bay Area, have certainly had a desire to go more green, renewable energy. Some of the locals, the CCAs more in Northern California have certainly chosen more to go lower cost. But again, the investor-owned utility, or PG&E, still plays a critical role in this factor. They still maintain all the wires, the poles, the distribution network, the billing. It's really a partnership where the CCA just procures the energy and is transmitted over the infrastructure that's in place. And for those entities that have formed CCAs, residents have a choice. They can either remain with PG&E, or they can go with this new power supplier. And this is just a quick illustration on what some of the, with regards to how a CCA operates. Obviously, there's many, many sources where power can be generated: wind, solar, hydro, geothermal. So there's multiple avenues to procure energy. Then ultimately, you'd go through PG&E's delivery service and get to the end customers. Okay. Benefits and risks. Some of the biggest benefits with CCAs that I've seen are local control. With a CCA, a JPA typically is formed with the participating municipalities. And the study that the county is looking at right now includes the unincorporated area of the county, the city of Oroville, city of Chico, and the town of Paradise. So any of those entities that were to participate in this would have members that actually sat on the governing board of this entity. They would set the rates. They would decide what type of power to procure. They would there's lots of options. They could choose programs that the resources available could be reinvested in. A lot of the discussion that we've been looking into is more economic development rates, or possibly even developing programs and energy projects here locally that also could be more of an economic development tool. Typically, the rates have been lower, so that's obviously a benefit. That could be an economic development rate. I mean, typically when you have less expenses, you have more disposable income, and typically you spend what you make. So that could be reinvested back into the community. As far as risks go, there's always risks. There is a thing that's right now that's being held before the PUC, is the PCIA, which is a power charge and difference adjustment. And I'm sure you probably all heard a little bit about this, but it essentially is, it's an issue where PG&E has procured a tremendous amount of energy for long-term contracts, and then if they lose the customers to CCAs, this charge adjustment is intended to mitigate those costs that PG&E has incurred. And where that lands with the PUC is really a big X factor, I think, in our feasibility study. We'll know that very likely here this fall in September or October. Customer participation is certainly a concern. If you don't have enough customers that continue to go with that CCA, you don't have enough of the economies to offset your cost. Typically, what we've seen in CCAs that have been formed throughout the state is about 95% participation rate. So that's obviously one of those risks as well. Power procurement cost, the more you look into energy, and it's an extremely complex and technical industry. You need to be careful about how much power you purchase, short-term, long-term contracts, and make sure you're getting the best deal for your residents. And the legislative climate certainly is always a factor. There's always set bills that are being proposed by various parties to support their cause, and some are for CCAs and some are not. So how did we get here today? What really started this was a few years back for the county. There was a number of local businesses that approached the county and asked for the county to do a study such as this to see if there's ways to save high energy users money. So that was one of the issues that brought this study to fruition. Another issue was it's in our General Plan 2030, which of course this has to do with our greenhouse gas and other mitigations to meet our requirements for renewable energy that the state puts out there. And it's also a priority action in the county's economic development strategy. So those are a few things that pushed us or drove us to where we're at today. In addition, so the board gave, the county board of supervisors gave us direction back in 2016 to perform the study. We went out for an RFP, and again, we entered into a contract with a firm called EES Incorporated. They're out of Washington, and we started this venture with them back in August of 2017. And as far as the next steps go, we've been actually working with them. Again, we've been working with them since August, so it's been a number of months now. We have a draft final report that we're pouring through and sending them questions to make sure all the questions that we have some good answers to them. We're doing some outreach with some of the local businesses that appear to be potential higher users for electricity, just to make sure they're aware of what a CCA is. And we're also, I've met with the city of Chico to do kind of a real quick CCA 101 like I'm doing here this evening, just to get the terminology on the mind of everybody, because ultimately it could become before your council for a decision. The plan is to bring the board of supervisors this report in a couple weeks on July 24th. That still is my goal. We have a lot of work to do to get there, but that is my goal. And then ultimately, for the board, the action we're requesting at that point in time is not to say yay or nay, but say, is this something you wish to continue to look at? Because if it is, then we take it out and garner more public input. And I'm sure there'll be questions that are raised during that process to make sure we get all the questions answered and also gather as much public input as we can before any decision is made. It's also going to go before the city of Chico, their first council meeting in August for similar direction. And then ultimately, we'd like to get this wrapped up by October, if possible, for decisions to be made. And that's a real quick 5 or 10 minute version of what a CCA is. Happy to answer any questions that I may.
Can you put the queue up in case somebody wants to speak? I don't see the name. I got my little queue back here, so it's nice. It's not huge. I had a question really quickly for Chief Lagrone. We were talking a little bit about some of our situation that we have going on with our electricity and the contract that we entered into. Is this any conflict, or is this something that could be on top of, or is that something we need to talk about later?
No, this would be something that would be on top of that. It's a totally separate matter.
Okay, thanks. Because I was going to ask some questions if that were the case.
Gotcha.
Is there any council members have any questions or comments? There are public speakers. So if you just take a seat, if they have some questions, they get 3 minutes to give their time, and then maybe you can meet separately with them afterwards if they had questions directly for you. Stephanie, and then John L. Miller George.
Hi. So I participated in a CCA, I think 2 years ago here in Oroville, and what happened, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but what ended up happening is that I thought I was going to be able to buy gas from this company at a much lower rate. I even sat and pulled out my PG&E bill and compared, and I thought I was making a really informed decision. But what ended up happening was that PG&E, instead of charging me for the gas, they charged me a distribution price, which was the exact same price as the gas. So I don't know if this is the same. There you are. I don't know if this is the same. Would it be the same situation? Have you figured out a solution around that? Is there something that we can negotiate with PG&E, because I ended up getting charged for the gas from the new company, and then still had to pay my wonderful PG&E bill. So I canceled it as fast as I possibly could, but it ended up costing me over $100. So and I would have also had to pay an early termination fee, but they didn't charge it. So that's my question.
Thank you, Stephanie. John Miller George.
anybody that wants to get involved with fossil fuels they're dead. Saudi Arabia is going solar. Okay? Right? They're going solar. Okay? You can generate your own power for way less than the monopoly prices you will get. This is an attempt to lock you into paying for past mistakes and not moving into the future. The last meeting I attended, there was a guy there who said, geez, why can't we get Tesla to come here? That's because nobody invites them. They did for Puerto Rico and for the island of Hawaii with all the volcanic action on the big island of Hawaii. Microgrids are it. Right now, solar power can be acquired for as cheap as 2 cents a kilowatt hour. Okay, then you put it in a battery and you use it when it's not the sun's not shining and when the wind's not blowing. Be careful when the monopoly comes around offering you a deal. This lady is just telling you the kind of deal you get.
Jack? And then there's also a gentleman, Fred, is it Spenger? Did you want to speak on this item too? Because you didn't put the item on this item. Yes. Okay, all right. Jack.
Yeah, Jack Mayor. I wasn't going to speak on this, but I can't resist the opportunity here. This actually got started here about 3 or 4 years ago. We brought in a gentleman from Sonoma County come over. We had a group of businessmen got together and we looked at the CCA. And what it is that there's about 40% of your bill is from generation. And that's what the CCA, the contracts for that part of the bill. Sonoma County, they anticipated that they would have 75% of the customers go with their CCA, and it ended up with 90%. And their rates have been 10 to 15% lower. Sonoma County goes with green energy. That's a certain portion of their CCA is made up of green energy, and they've done quite well with it. So that's what you had. PG&E did not like this, but it's working in a lot of cities. There's a lot more of them going for it now. A lot of cities are. So what it is, it will result, you have a choice. You can stay with PG&E, but one of the things they spend a lot of money that you immediately go as a customer of CCA, and then you can opt out of it. So it is a choice that the Community Choice Program will decide how much green power you have and how much it is. PG&E recently probably were closing down Diablo Canyon. That's primarily because their costs were so high at Diablo that they were no longer competitive in the field. So that's why they got out of it. But it would be a good thing. It gives you your businesses a little bit of a jump on the other. We have some good items in the city to offer them, but it's just one more tool in your bag that would offer that the CCA would be it. And it's an optional thing, do it. But you pretty much, the CCA and members you would have on there would be the ones that determines how much solar power or how much you bought. Another one, a little one here that makes this attractive is South Feather has their often, and they're looking at CCAs to sell their electricity to. So that would be a great opportunity that you may end up buying power from South Feather. That's a possibility. Make your rates lower. So I've been in favor of this. We've started a group of it. I'm glad to see it's carrying on, but it is a great opportunity for the locals here to get a lower cost energy on that 40%. PG&E still maintains the line. They do the billing, but that 40% of your bill that you see for generation on there, that's what you would be dealing with. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Fred?
That kind of answered my question. I was just wondering, you said mostly in Southern California, but I was just wondering if you knew any communities. It sounds like the whole county, though, Sonoma. So I don't know if you knew personally of any communities that you could talk about.
You can come back up and answer that if you'd like. That's near, and also maybe address the generation charge of the difference in comparison to what we have locally, not necessarily in another community, which you found.
So the first question, and I'm happy to give you my card so we can maybe get more details on I'm sorry, on the. I'm not sure, because this is about electricity, so I'm not sure how the gas issue comes into play, but I'm happy to touch base offline. We can dig into that a little bit. There are, and it is right now.
So if you actually speak into the microphones, because it's being recorded, you can.
Yes. So there are 18 CCAs in formation right now that have launched, and they are. If you look at the map I should have brought a picture of this, but they are primarily up and down, north to south on the coast, the coastal regions. Humboldt County recently did one, but the ones more local to us, Pioneer Energy is in Placer. They just recently launched in 2018, and in Yolo County, Valley Clean Energy, which includes Yolo, Woodland, and Davis. But there are 18 that are actually in formation right now, and there are a number more that are in the works. I can't remember if there's other questions.
The transmission charge.
The transmission charge, and I think this gentleman's articulated it very well. There are going to be, PG&E is still, again, they're maintaining the lines. They still have all the infrastructure. They still have costs that they will be billing for, and the purpose here is, again, it's just solely with the energy generation, and that's where if you can save 2 or 3% and pass it on to the consumers, what it'll do over the long run, and what we've seen in other entities, and we've talked to a number of them, and they have eventually, after you pay off your startup costs, you build up a sufficient reserve, and ideally you want to have a rate stabilization reserve. So if you have any fluctuation in power procurement prices, you have a stabilization fund where you can keep your prices competitive. And then ultimately, if you have additional funds, the idea there, again, I keep saying local control, but the idea is local control. You can, as the members of the CCA, there will be a board, and they will take public input, and they will determine, okay, what do we want to do now? Do we want to have a economic development rate to entice businesses to come to our region? Do we want to do something in economic development to keep businesses in our region? Do we want to target lower income families with a lower rate? Do we want to invest in power projects throughout the community that create jobs? There's a lot of, and again, in the Bay Area, San Mateo, Sonoma, they've done a lot. Their focus has been on green, so they've seen a lot of work done down there with electronic vehicle charging stations. So it really depends on what the they're very unique. No two CCAs are the same, because again, it's all about local control.
So Brian, I want to jump in here because there is a pretty long agenda, and that is, this is strictly information. Right. It'll be 6 months down the road before the city was asked to do anything. It's to give you some background. Brian's with the county. He has been incredibly accessible. I would say anybody in the public or on council who'd like to talk to him.
Absolutely.
My experience is he's been very open to it. So this is just an introduction to the subject, period.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom, because these are presentations. Typically, we don't have speakers. We don't have blue cards on them, so thank you.
No, you're welcome. Thank you for your time.
Moving on to item number 4.2, it's the Cal Water Study. Mark Adams, North Star Engineering. And we do have a couple of speakers on this, and I'm going to ask that I will call the couple of speakers, but any additional speakers to please ask it on a sidebar, because this really is a presentation at this time. Thank you.
Good evening. Thanks for having me here. Yeah, go ahead. The idea of this study I did was to look at the 3 entities that serve water to the Oroville community and trying to identify ways, ultimately, if we possibly save costs. In looking through the entities in the beginning, it became real apparent that we were really looking at 2 vastly different types of entities, and thus the apples and oranges. And I was even reluctant to use apples and oranges because they're too similar. You can eat both of them. They're both round. These entities are so different that they're not, the apples and oranges just doesn't capture the differences. So South Feather Water and Power Agency and Thermalito Water and Sewer District are both public special districts. They're irrigation districts in the beginning, and it's a special public district law that created them. Next one. Whereas California Water Service is a private, for-profit corporation, publicly traded. You can buy stock in the company. It's regulated by the California Public Utilities Commission. And as a result, it has, when you look at their balance sheet and you look at their expenses, totally different organization. It's just so different. So to kind of put it in perspective, right off the top, they have about 17.5% of their costs just captured in taxes and earnings. They have to pay taxes. The other two entities don't really pay much in the way of taxes, some minor ones. And I mean, when I looked at this and started comparing numbers, and the numbers I'm showing, keep in mind that they're so different that it was hard to really get numbers that you can absolutely compare. So I took some liberties with some of the things, and there's always exceptions to the numbers that we can get into detail on that, but wanted to keep it kind of at a high level perspective on the differences and where the costs really were, so that you could understand the cost of water is being provided to the Oroville community. Next slide. Kind of the perspective too, high level. Keep in mind the really good news for Oroville is we have 3 entities that I've had the chance to work with for decades, literally, as an engineer in the community. I think they're all well managed, they're well operated. I know the people that are out in the field taking care of the systems, they really do care, and they really are working hard to provide high quality water to Oroville. And even better news is Oroville has lots of water available to it. You know, the water utility is one that we really take for granted. And it's, you know, the power goes out once in a while. The water really never goes out. It's always there for us. And it's always safe to drink. It's the best water in the world that we've got in the community, and we should be thankful for that and recognize that, and that we really do have 3 entities that are really doing a good job of providing that water. But there's a big difference in costs, and this is the you know, for a typical water bill, Cal Water $62 for a month, South Feather's $19, and Thermalito's $36, kind of in the middle. And so why are they so different? This is kind of a typical lower water use is 10 units per month. Next slide, please. Well, South Feather is the one that gets looked at a lot because of the very low rates they provide. And what people really need to keep in mind is that they're highly subsidized rates. And so that $19 a month, if you really look at the costs, and this is the cost that from their P&L statement, is a little over $44 for the same unit of water. That's what it costs. And that difference between the 19 and the 44 is being subsidized by the power generation. They sell power. That's, you know, so as an entity, they're able to do that. They've got something coming online. They just completed a major improvement project for their Miners Ranch water treatment plant. And they had to borrow a lot of money to do that. It's really a major improvement for to provide water to the Oroville community. It's got capacity for, you know, for development into the future a long time, and for other areas. But when you take that financing costs that are actually not on the water side, they're on the hydro side, and the depreciation, the costs for the South Feather water are actually more like $61 per unit. And if you look at the, you know, the last slide, Cal Water's at 62. So the cost to produce the water for South Feather is very similar to the cost to produce the water for Cal Water. It really shows how beneficial those power sales are. Next slide. I really question, and I brought this up, and if I was to speak before South Feather's board, I would caution them, in my opinion, that they really should be looking in the future and how stable that revenue source is from hydro generation. They have a power sales agreement that expires in a couple of years, and you know, they're actively searching for ways to sell power. Jack talked about that. There's opportunities out there, but there's nothing certain right now. And so it's such a subsidy to the cost of water that I'm not sure it's sustainable into the future. And so, like I said, if I was able to talk to their board, that's what I'd tell them. Thermalito's water, the actual costs are, what they're charging for it. I think that they benefit from being a water and sewer agency, so they're able to split some of their costs. For example, if they have one backhoe, they charge part of it to the sewer side and part of it to the water side, so they have some efficiencies. They're in the same old metal building they've been in for as long as any of us can remember. They're very frugal, and I think they're, if I was to talk to their board, I'd compliment them on that, meeting the challenges of operating a district like that, and doing it in a very frugal manner. A couple of the districts, I think South Feather and Thermalito, I would caution both of them on what I see that they're spending for capital improvements and replacing pipelines, and that personally I think that those areas are underfunded, and so I'd ask them to increase their capital improvement funding. But again, it's really on the South Feather is my concern about the revenue from the power generation. So just to, a lot of the focus on Cal Water has been, on their administration and operations costs. Just to put it in perspective, that's what this slide shows, that about 36% of their total costs go to admin and operations. Thermalito's at 27%, South Feather's at 17%. I think they load a lot of theirs onto the hydro side, so it's much lower. And then again, Thermalito has two entities. They're not just a water system, they're a water and sewer system, and it really is a benefit to them. Next slide, please. Again, just to kind of put things in perspective, and these numbers are very round, the capital spending. Cal Water, they're trying to accomplish two things as a publicly traded stock. They're trying to improve the value of the stock, and they want to pay dividends. And so the dividends come from their from the profits, or in the form of dividends. The value of the stock is a lot of times based on the value of the entity itself. And so if they invest in their facilities, that's investing in the value of the stock, and it helps. And so I think that's they seem to be a little more proactive in the capital spending side. And if you just look at the dollars, not the percentages, the dollar amounts are pretty low for Thermalito, and South Feather would be very low except for the Miners Ranch treatment plant. It's 85% of their capital spending right now. So, what can we do to reduce costs? I think on the Cal Water side, they're actively pursuing this, but the Miocene ditch has been, it's the old way of getting water to Oroville, and there's a lot better ways of doing it. And unfortunately, there's some people along there that rely on that, and so it's a challenge. You can't just turn the tap off. People's properties and livelihoods depend on that. But it really is costly for them to maintain, and my recommendation to them is that they continue their efforts to try and get rid of that obligation. They have an agreement that they've worked out to wheel their water through Lake Oroville and into the power canal, so they can pull it out of there. And so I think that's really the future. The next slide. The second item there, the 3 water treatment plants, it just, as an engineer, it seems silly, really, for a community this size to have 3 water treatment plants, but it is the way it is. It's kind of how things have evolved in Oroville. Doing away with one of them or two of them is not easy because there's investments in those. And, you know, if you look at a balance sheet and some of your business people and you understand what that means, you can't just write things off like that, especially if you're you know, a public entity. But it really is a recommendation would be to look somehow and get some good solid conversation going. Can we in the future try and eliminate the overhead related to water treatment? The reality of water conservation is more cautionary. People don't understand, I don't think, that when you conserve water, your water will cost more that you use, because the baseline costs don't go away. Some of the cost of water is in treating it and distributing it, but you still have the same miles of pipeline that have to be replaced and maintained. They're no different even if you're not selling any water. You still have to take care of that. A lot of the water system, the sizing of it and the importance of it is also for the fire suppression. The system size a lot of times is dictated as just as much by the fire flow requirements as by the domestic daily requirements. And the fire flow doesn't go away. You still have to provide that with pumps that have capacity and treatment plant that has capacity and storage that has capacity. So it's water entities all across the country are really struggling with the water conservation, the reality of it, because we've got a mandate in the state of California to start using less water. You know, Governor Brown he's setting some goals for us. And you're going to use less water, but your water bill's not going to drop as much as you would hope it would by using less water. And the different entities have ways of dealing with that mandated water conservation. I know that, you know, working for the entities in town and, you know, a property owner and business owner in the area, we've got a couple water entities with Thermalito and South Feather that have way more water rights than they use or could ever use, really, locally. And so the same water conservation rules are going to be applied to us here as they are in Southern California, though. And even though we have all the water here. That's really the into my presentation. As I was kind of tasked with this, it wasn't to come up with ways to get rid of Cal Water. It was under the assumption that we're still going to have 3 water entities, and just really looking at ways to, you know, is there a way we can save costs? If water sales is another way, maybe, I know it's been discussed, if Cal Water could buy their water, we know how much they're paying, about $120 an acre foot to PG&E to purchase the water. But I'm telling you, because I've been involved with some water sales with different entities around the state, the baseline cost is just to sell water, to put it together and to strike a deal, isn't much lower than that. So, and you can see what the cost, that's just to buy raw water. And you can see the cost for South Feather to produce the treated water is very similar to Cal Water to produce it. So there may be some opportunities for savings, and I know the entities are talking about this, but they're marginal opportunities, because I don't think the ratepayers in South Feather are going to want to give up their subsidy and spread it to others. You know, they like what they're getting right now, would be my guess.
Mayor, I would suggest.
Yeah, we're gonna go ahead.
I would suggest that this is the beginning of an effort by the city, and in fact, several council members have already asked for further research. So I think we're going to wind up having a study session to go into it in greater depth. So this is simply an introduction. There's certainly a lot more discussion to follow.
Right. So
Thanks, Mark.
I already made a promise to the 3 speakers that have turned in their cards, but other than that, this really is information only. And since I said, Jack, you can be first, and then Soya, and then Stephanie. And if you could not repeat each other, if that's
okay,
the
I'll
case.
try to make this quick and simple. I won't give you the 30-minute presentation. It's pretty well summarized. I attached to you here. There's a editorial in Oroville, in the Chico Enterprise Record, said Oroville water study verified what we already knew, and that's basically what the study did. And one of the reasons we asked for the study is there are opportunities maybe to save money or the utilities working together. And so there might be certain things that would be worth further exploration. Could or should Cal Water purchase treated water or raw water from South Feather? That is a possibility. South Feather has 165,000 acre feet in storage. They use about 20. They have water. They want to sell water. They got a new treatment plant that does up to 20 million and gallons a day, and they're using maybe 10 has been the highest. So they'd like to sell water either raw or treated. So that's an opportunity that should be pursued. Could there be reductions in the water treatment plants? Possibly. You have 3 full treatment plants serving this roughly 13,000 customers. One plant would normally do it. They're very costly operations to run a full treatment plant. Thermalito basically has a brand new plant, and obviously South Feather has a brand new treatment plant. Cal Water's treatment plant is old, it's been refurbished in that part, but does that. The Miocene ditch he touched on there. It's a ditch, not a canal. This option's been available to Cal Water for 50 years to take the water right behind their plant. I'm glad to see they're doing it because that was an inferior quality of water they were having to treat, which is actually costly for them. They mentioned in the study too that Lake Oroville has a deal in the real land, but if they could get these 3 entities to click together on there, we'd have a much better reliable source of water for all of the customers, and there should be some benefits there. The study didn't, although he did touch on it here this evening, that both South Feather and Thermalito have a tremendous pool. It's a water bank, basically, of water available. We talked a little bit about the number of acreages and that, but the bottom line is make it real simple here is revenues by customers, and it sort of reminds me of that car ad. We all pay the same, but the difference is what we charge, and this is what we charge. These are the items. I broke it down. You can talk the percentages of that, but let's put them in some dollars. Profits, this is for 3,600 customers that pay these bills. The profits are roughly, this is out of their 215 rate case, with 750,000. The income tax, which is on that, is not paid by South Feather, not by Cal Water, it's paid by the Oroville customers, 250. They purchase water for 300,000. Both South Feather and Thermalito don't have to purchase. The CPUC charge is 60,000. It's 1.4%, and I've mentioned that before because it's funny that the CPU even charges us to do that, but the higher the rates, the more money they get, and that's not a good one. We're going to pursue that one too. And the biggest one here is $800,000 for their general office expense. That's to oversee a 3,600 customer water. That's ridiculous. That pays all of our county administrators, city administrators, and that. And that comes out to about $2,160,000, and that's basically the cost of all 3 entities. When you figure it out, is about the same, except the difference is what they charge. And when Cal Water says we only get our actual costs, well, I don't know if any of these figures I talked about here are actual costs, but the local employees are basically doing a good job on all 3 entities. I'll finish up here in about 5 seconds. And on the final here, I've attached to your deal, there's a bill from, which is the final bill, is from Foster's. They pay $765. Cal Water Chico pays $224. South Feather pays $86. Thermalito $158. And that boils down to Cal Water is 8 times higher than South Feather, 4.5 times higher than Thermalito, and 3 times higher than what Cal Water Chico does. Thank you. I'm sorry I ran over.
Thank you, Jack. Celia Hirschman and then Stephanie.
I gave a report here in 2012. I believe it's very similar to this. Most of you were either in the audience or on the dais. The fact is that at that time, if never presented prior, the City Council was well informed of the outrageous pricing that Cal Water charges the citizens of Oroville, despite numerous complaints by individual residents and businesses, and the consequences these rates have on the financial health and well-being of our community. Nothing was done until now, thanks to, frankly, the head of Oroville Hospital. We're very grateful for him, a business in town, one of the largest, for putting up the money to do this study. And now you are charged with doing the next right thing. And in my opinion, the next right thing is that you put together a consortium of residents and businessmen along with the city administrator and city planning staff to identify what are options that are realistic for us. There's no one in this room thinks Cal Water is paying fair rates. So let's not even pretend that that's going on. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, Mark, but a lot of the things you said I completely disagree with. The taste is so awful for Cal Water. It's horrible. I have to filter it just to grow plants. There's no way that people pay the same amount of water. If I save water in Oroville, I'm charged a RAM charge by the California Public Utilities Commission. That does not exist for South Feather or Thermalito. In fact, during the California drought, where everybody was asked to, I think, save 20%, South Feather sent a note out to their people saying, not only do you not have to save 20% because we have so much water, but we're lowering your water rates. So let's not pretend that this is an equal playing field on any level. And I hold Cal Water completely responsible. They've had 90 years to set up a geothermal system. They haven't. The fact is, geothermal or water energy creation is not stopping at South Feather. We are always going to have water generation running down to create energy. So let's get on with the fact that we live in the place where there are huge amounts of water and stop penalizing the people of this community for an outrageous, publicly held New York Stock Exchange company. I am sorry, George, that it exists here, but it's not fair to us. Thank you.
Stephanie? And then that will be the last speaker on this.
I will try not to repeat, but so the presenter said that he made it sound like South Feather has been backwards in their approach, trying to save their customers money. He focused on the fact that he called it a subsidy, and yes, but typically people think of a subsidy as the government stepping in and, covering some kind of cost so our milk doesn't, the price of milk doesn't fluctuate too much. But no, this was South Feather being really, truly forward thinking and thinking of their customers and thinking water is a necessity. That's not something that's optional. And we really shouldn't be gouging and forcing people to, decide between medicine and water. And for some people that is the case, and or having a garden, or just having a decent looking yard. But South Feather made choices and decisions and wise decisions that will keep their water rates affordable for generations. And he made it sound like the fact that they're making money off of that is some kind of a risk. And I'm not sure what planet there is a future that, people are going to need less water or less electricity. So it's very wise, very forward thinking on their part. Cal Water could have, followed in that path, and they could be taking steps that would actually lower our rates. But instead they don't, because they are only profit driven. Their motivation is not their customers. They don't care about their expenses. The CPUC guarantees them the ability to charge us for every dime that they spend. And I just read yesterday in the paper that they are now talking about spending another $895 million in California. We all will pay for that. It's not like, okay, great, upgrades or, fixing infrastructure. Of course, that's part of the game. But don't get me, we all pay for that. And with, like Celia said, no consideration for the actual water quality. I cannot drink our water because the chlorine makes me gag. Like inhaling it, bringing it to my face, it's like I might as well be drinking pool water. So Cal Water's product is awful, their prices are awful, and we have got to actually do something about it. Studies are great, but let's do something. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephanie. Okay, thank you for those. That's the end of the presentations this evening. We're moving on to the new format of the agenda, which is the non-agenda items. And so we have several people to speak on a non-agenda item. We ask that you keep your time to 3 minutes, and I only have about 7 cards here, but if there's more than 10, we'll reduce the time on that. So the first person is Bobby O'Reilly, and the next one is Andrew Smith.
Good evening yet again, Council, Mayor. So, as I stated when I first spoke this evening, I was going to touch some basis on a few things that were related to that agenda topic. I ask the Council that you please respect your constituents. And I'm not talking about just at a council meeting. I'm talking about in public, elsewhere other than here. You are representing the city. It is very non-classy to disrespect your constituents, both here and away from here. Some examples I have, Councilwoman Del Rosario speaks over people or during people's speaking quite frequently. If I'm speaking and Councilwoman Del Rosario starts speaking, I stop speaking and let her have the floor. Vice Mayor Goodson blocking people on Facebook, standing outside these council chambers after a council meeting on video nonetheless, telling somebody that because they live outside of the city limits, their opinion does not matter. Extremely disgraceful. Linda Draper rolling her eyes constantly when people are speaking. And even those, council, yes, but even those who work with the council as far as, and this is just my personal opinion, I don't know the extent of all of the job description, but there is sometimes where Mr. Lando talks over council when council is talking, and I just personally find that disrespectful. Like the old golden rule says, if you don't have anything nice to say, I say be like Jack and Art and just be quiet.
Thank you, Bobby. Andy Smith? Andrew Smith? Okay. Thank you. I know you're tall and the microphone's low, but thank you. Thank you.
I'll do my best. My name is Andrew Smith. I own Sierra Gym Company. I've been there for 30 some odd years, one of the old dogs. My subject that I had today, compared to the ones you've had already, is a fairly simple fix. It has to do with the street parking in the downtown historical district of Oroville. It's very beneficial to all the businesses. But unfortunately, the very simple rule of parking on the streets is not being enforced. And that makes it difficult for us every day to have a convenient place for our customers to come and hope to do business with us. Non-enforcement leads to confusion and frustration. Reporting the problem has become a useless endeavor. If an officer shows up, there is no follow-up, which makes the whole point moot. Posting notices on violators' windshields leads to nothing more than arguments and confrontations, which is unsavory to everybody, and loss of patronage because of bad feelings. Loss of customers through the inconvenience or because of the limited range of mobility because they have to walk from a far-off parking lot, which to most of us is not so bad, but to a lot of us is not so easy. I think that you can see that how these things can affect a small business's bottom line. That may be a bad word in some areas, but to me, my bottom line is my paycheck. It's what I bring home every week. I don't think there's anybody up there who's willing to give up their paycheck because of the inconvenience that is being ascribed by others. And because of that, I feel this is for, maybe not for on the scope of things that have happened here tonight, but to us in the downtown district, this is very important. and it's gone on for too long. Also, since I have a few seconds left, the sidewalks in the downtown area are not only disgraceful, unsightly, and unsafe, but for you, the city, it's playing with dynamite. I have witnessed personally at least 2 people become badly injured because of those sidewalks. My own window washer nearly fell out into the street because he hit one of the areas where the skirts were not, had not been reapplied, where the trees were taken out, and could have been hurt very badly. There have been ambulances brought in to bring people off if they're injured. You're really lucky that at this point here, you haven't had a big old lawsuit, and more than one, to bring your attention to these problems.
Thank you. Bill Spear, and then John Miller George, and then Eric Smith.
Madam Mayor, City Council, I would like to bring up an incident that happened on our last City Council meeting, and it's in regards to the homeless. We have a big problem. It's all over the place of the homeless, and on our last City Council meeting, the Hope Center and the Oroville Rescue Mission were singled out, saying that they couldn't support them because they were faith-based. And I was pretty offended by those comments as being in the faith-based community. I really love the Hope Center and their heart for the homeless and how they are addressing the problem that nobody else wants to do. Right there, they're feeding and taking care of and clothing the most desperate people. And our rescue mission, they've been serving Oroville for a long time, and people can always count on the rescue mission to help the people that no one else wants to help, and that's a hard job. And Pastor Steve and Pastor Larry, there was no reason to single them out and say that because they were faith-based that we couldn't support them. It's the community needs to work together, just as we were talking about 3 different sewer plants and we only need 1. If we would just come together and help the people that are already doing it, utilize our resources smart, get alongside them and help them, we could make a difference. Us being divided is not helping anyone. So I'm going to pray for the Hope Center and the Rescue Mission. Lord, we thank you for them. We thank you for their service to our city. We thank you for their heart, for those that no one else want to help, for the naked and the hurting, the addicted and the afflicted. And Father, we pray that you would use them, Lord. We pray your provision for them, that you would encourage them and strengthen them. Use them, Father, to restore our sons and our daughters to us. Use them to restore moms and dads. Use them, Father, to help guide them back into society to be useful members. Thank you for Oroville Rescue Mission, and we pray your prosperity upon them. We pray that they would not be divided out because they have faith, but that they would be embraced and encouraged and helped, that we wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel. We would use what's already working, that we would, as a community, would come alongside them and lift them up and praise them for their faith and encourage them, and that we would answer the call that you have called for such a time as this.
Thank you, Billy.
I'd like to respond to that since he's quoting something I said, or misquoting actually. What I said at that last meeting was the Continuum of Care Homeless Committee for Butte County. A lot of the grants can't be distributed to faith-based groups. I personally have donated money and food to the Oroville Rescue Mission and to the Hope Center. And so I really don't appreciate your implying that I'm not concerned about that. And as I said, because they're faith-based, they do not qualify for some of the grants through the Continuum of Care. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. John Miller George and Eric Smith.
Wow, this certainly wasn't what I expected for tonight's meeting.
Could you start the clock, the timer?
I really came tonight to talk about the staff, the city staff. I put in several information requests. They've been polite. We kind of worked through it together because I'd never done it before. And so I contacted Joanna Gutierrez, I think is her, I hope I pronounced her name right. And she kind of shepherded me through, what do I ask for, you know, don't ask for 5 things on one request, you know. And so I just want to express my gratitude, since how we've had all this fun stuff about staff. I'm tickled to death with the staff that Oroville has, okay? One of the problems that we all face, Thomas Jefferson described it. He said, if the banks get to make our money, they will use inflation and depression until we have none. And Northern California has been losing ground economically for quite a while, and it's been concentrated in larger and larger conglomerate corporations, and they are buying politicians. And that means that the rest of us get poorer while they get obscenely richer. A lot of people say, geez, I wish we would go back to the good old days. Well, you know, the good old days had a financial transaction tax on Wall Street. They had huge taxes on the rich. And we all did better because that money got spent back in the local economies. Will Rogers said, and I quote, well, roughly quote, I don't think I could ever quote something, but he said that, you know, if you give the money to the poor man, the rich man will have it by nightfall, but at least the poor man will have had something. And so that's why we need to think of ways to bring more money into Oroville. I would include Butte County, but Oroville. And stop thinking about money as American dollar bills. Start thinking of it as energy, okay? Water. What you guys have here is things that people want, but it doesn't do any good to set up a big box store that brings stuff in from somewhere else to sell to you and take the last little bit of money you got. You need to concentrate on things that really do benefit the local economy and grow it. Thanks.
Thank you. Eric Smith? Thank you. Okay, moving on to, that's non-agenda items. So we're moving off of that item. We're moving on to the consent calendar, and I know there's some items that need to be
Madam Mayor,
pulled.
Bill LeGrone, if I could I please pull 6.2, 6.3, and 6.6?
Well, you took the words right out of my mouth.
Sorry.
Okay, so Marlene. And 6.6. Who's pulling 6.6? Would that be you?
Yes, ma'am.
So with items number 6.2 and 6.3, for the purpose, just to clarify, that when you have a conflict in these areas and there are council members that live within, is it 500-foot radius?
Yes.
That they need to excuse themselves. So we're going to excuse, no, we're going to pull.
I have to be out for 6.2.
Okay, so we're gonna pull 6.2, 6.3, 6.6, and 6.7.
And Madam Mayor, on 6.2 and 6.3, staff is recommending that councilperson Barry, Hatley, and Thompson recuse themselves.
We got that, but before they do, can we vote on the consent calendar with those items pulled? That's okay. With those items pulled on the consent calendar, does anybody have?
I move to
wait,
approve.
wait. Linda and Marlene, do you guys, you need a minute?
Yeah, we're trying to figure out where we are on this map.
Yeah, okay.
Quite
Give us a
honestly.
minute.
Okay, 6, 2, 3, and 6 and 7. Okay, I think they're exempt.
Joanne, can you pull up the vote?
Message them to clear that.
Jackie, can you clear the speakers?
Here's Oroville, Quincy.
They haven't started
Joanna
yet.
has
They haven't
it.
made the motion, but they will.
Yeah, we can't.
No, they're gonna-
I can't see that tiny print. I'm sorry, but I can't see that tiny.
They're gonna make a motion,
print.
presumably on 6-1, 6-4, and 6-5.
So we're in the property, so we need to recuse. Oh, so we're okay. We're okay. Okay.
I think you guys voted on this last year.
Right. Right. I'm fine.
Thank you. Oh, we're in the circle. If we're in the circle, we're okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, with items 6.2, 6.3, 6.6, and 6.7 pulled off the consent calendar. Any comments, questions, or motion, please?
I move that we approve consent calendar exempt items 6.2, 6.3, 6.6, and 6.7.
I'll second that.
First and second, voting is open. All votes are in. Voting closed.
Carries by unanimous vote.
Okay, so Art and Jack are going to be excused, and we'll.
And I would recommend Councilperson Thompson too.
Oh, and Councilmember Thompson, sorry. Item 6.2 is the resolution of intention to levy and collect assessments. This is an annual levy. We go through this every year, so that's why it's on the consent agenda. Consolidated Benefit Assessment District. Does anybody have any questions or comments? If not, I'm looking for a motion.
I move that we adopt resolution number 8712.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Voting's open.
But the
That was me.
All votes are in. Voting closed.
That motion carries.
Thank you. 6.3, resolution of intention to levy and collect assessment taxes, Oroville Consolidated Landscape and Lighting Maintenance District. Once again, this is an annual consolidation report.
I move that we adopt resolution number 8713.
Is there a second? Thank you. Voting's open. All votes are, oh, no, they're not. Almost all votes are in. Voting closed.
And that motion carries.
Okay. Moving on to item 6.6, adopting resolution of the final budget.
Madam Mayor, if we could we do 6.7 first? Because I think
Yes.
6.6 may take more time.
Okay, 6.7, Marlene, you requested to have approve and request of the docents pulled?
Yes, this has to do with the lot home and the fact that there's been frequent vandalism and it's becoming expensive to repair.
Marlene, they can't hear you. Do you have your microphone?
I'll start over. This has to do with the lot home and the fact that it's becoming a victim of vandalism. Windows are being broken. The thing that concerns me most is that there was a fire set in the main dining room and in the commercial kitchen, which means someone is heating themselves or cooking food or something inside the home itself. And I'm worried about the fire danger. And I'm wondering if, I know that we rent the building, I'm wondering if we couldn't get a handyman to actually live in that area, or a family to live there who then are in charge of taking care of it rather than renting it out. Because I think the fees and repairing and this sort of thing are going to become excessive, and I don't want to lose the lot home. It's the gem of downtown. We don't want to lose that.
And Marlene, to clarify, I think you mean that small house there, the caretaker home on the property.
Just for clarity for the council, we have recently rented out the caretaker apartment at the Chinese temple and the caretaker home at the lot home. They do not, they're not technically responsible for providing any sort of service there. They pay rent for the facility that they're living in, they're residing in, but they are there, their eyes and ears on scene. So there is somebody that is currently living at both of our temple and our lot home at this time to help keep a better eye on it.
But what I'm wondering is if, I'm sorry,
That's good.
I didn't mean to talk over you, I'm sorry. What I mean is putting them there rent-free, and that is their responsibility to look out for it. I don't know if we put up cameras that they can view or what we do, but there's got to be a way to better protect that home.
They do receive a reduced rent for trying to keep an eye on the place. I think it's very difficult for them to 24/7 provide that security, but there are people that are on site now that are actually living in the lot home, on the lot home grounds, in the caretaker facility, and there's also one at the Chinese temple in the caretaker apartment.
Okay, it doesn't seem to be solving the problem though.
No, it's a very difficult problem. The problem goes back to one of the largest problems we have in the city is lack of resources.
Well, how much do they pay for rent each month?
I'm just guessing off the top of my head, but it's less than 500.
Yeah, if we put somebody in there who can do the repairs and who is responsible, it just seems like a better solution than renting it out to somebody who kind of has responsibility or who's supposed to watch. Because I know things go on there. There are parties that go on down there and nobody says anything to them outside. I've heard complaints about beer parties going on in on the grounds, and nobody responds.
Well, I will certainly let the housing department know who is responsible for the leasing and the renting of the facility, and see what we have going on there, see what we can do, and see what sort of changes that we can make to try to better address that.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So I know that the actual agenda item has to do with a fee waiver. Councilmember Draper, is that what you wanted to discuss, was the fee waiver?
Oh, no, I was just helping her clarify that she meant the caretaker.
I'd like to make a motion.
Thank you.
I move that we approve the request of the docents as presented.
I'll second that.
Voting will be open
soon. So now.
Oh, everybody's there now.
Yeah.
Janet.
I thought I pushed it. Oh.
All votes are in. Does anybody wish to change? Voting closed.
And that motion carries unanimously.
Moving on to 6.6, resolution adopting the final budget for 2018-2019. Chief LeGrone.
I'm going to start out, and then I'm going to hand this off to Ruth. I'd like to thank the Finance Department for presenting the council with this budget. It was a very difficult budget to produce. It incorporated many, many hours of revision, change, and working at different ways and different strategies to make our books come as close to possible as balancing. We are presenting a balanced budget. However, the budget is balanced with one-time money. We are infusing $274,000 into our budget. Our revenues continue to not keep up with our expenditures. Our expenditures primarily, the big increases come from PERS and they come from health insurance. The cost of PERS is not anything that we get to control. This city council and this city should actually be congratulated for keeping its PERS at the lowest rate that they possibly could. Many times, and for many years, there was many cities and councils that bought into a higher retirement package for their employees. The city did not. It resisted that temptation, even though it was pushed very hard and pressed very hard by many of its labor groups and unions to increase that benefit package. They did not. So not that we're in a position where we are to be admired, because our position is not very good. It's not as bad as others. I just wanted to bring it to your attention. The budget is a balanced budget, but we are budgeting it with the infusion of one-time monies. That money is going to run out somewhere around 23, 24. When we run out of that one-time money, we will no longer have a balanced budget. What we will be doing is we will be upside down. The only other place that we have to retreat is to continue the reduction in services, or the complete stoppage of services. So we need to make some sort of adjustment. I've led my life. There's two ways you handle a problem. That's either when it comes to finances, you either increase your income or you lower your bills. We've lowered our bills. You know, we have to look at creative ways, new ways to increase our revenues. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Ruth. Let Ruth cover whatever it is that she would like to touch on in the budget, and we'll go from there.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Council. I just want to say a few things about the budget. There is a new fund this year. We opened a fund called the Pension Stabilization Fund. That's where we're putting all the money that Council designates to be put in our Section 115 trust. So I really have to congratulate us that we have committed over $4 million to the Pension Stabilization Fund. A lot of that is going to be the RDA loan payback from the state, and we'll be getting that over the course of about 5 years. But all in all, we'll be getting over $4 million. So I probably will be coming to you from time to time when we have one-time revenues and asking you if you'd like to put it in to this fund, because we don't budget with one-time revenues. So it'll be up to the council what you want to do when we do get one-time revenues. Like I talked about last year, I need to bring to you what you would like to do with the FEMA money we received last year. Something else, anything? We pretty much maintain the same staffing levels with the exception of maybe 2.5 positions down. We continue to realize savings from the pay cuts we initiated last year, negotiated pay cuts. Definitely would be a much more of a deficit situation if we hadn't done that. I really can't think of anything new or different, any major changes from last year. Does the council have any questions?
Vice Mayor Goodson? You're in the queue.
Yes. Ruth, could you give a breakdown of what that RDA money consists of, that 3.5?
Yes, we're receiving $3.5 million over the course of, I think, 5 years. $2.6 million is going to go to the general fund, but the council has already committed that to our pension stabilization fund, so I'm putting it straight into our new fund. And $717,000 needs to go back to housing. So that's the total $3.5 million that we are going to be receiving. And we're receiving that because we did the last and final ROPS for the RDA. We're closing it out. The only thing left is a bond that won't be paid off until 2031.
And is that the original loan was $17 million? It's now been reduced to $15 million. It's my understanding that a large portion, if not all of our property tax goes to pay that, approximately 1.5 million
1.8
per year?
1.8,
okay, closer to the 2.
Yeah.
And so we don't even see the property tax revenue. Thank you.
That's correct.
Any other questions or comments from the dais? Okay, looking for a motion. Remember, a budget is a moving document. It's a living, breathing document, so
I move that we
changes.
I'm good. I'm good. I move that we adopt resolution number 8716 for the resolution of the Oroville City Council adopting the annual budget for fiscal year 2018 through 2019.
I second.
First and second, voting's open. All votes are in. Does anybody wish to change? Voting closed.
And that motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 7, which is public hearings. How public hearings work, just as a reminder. We open the public hearing, staff presents information and answers all questions to the council. Hearing then is open to the public. Speakers are requested to provide a speaker card. Public comment section is then closed, and the council then debates, finalizes the debate of the issue, and takes action. So moving on to item 7.1, consider ordinance and resolution for local sales tax ballot measure. Chief LeGrone.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Council. What is before you tonight for consideration? You're going to, this will be a 3-part process. The first part is going to be a description of what we're asking you to do tonight, the things that we're asking you to consider and to determine. There's going to be 4 things that we need you to determine and consider based upon the potential of a revenue measure that would be submitted to the citizens of Oroville to vote on. Those 4 things are going to be the percentage of the proposed sales tax, the duration of the proposed sales tax, the citizen oversight, whether the council would like to include that or not, and if so, how many people would be on that oversight committee, and also whether this is a general or a specific tax. Those are all things that you will need to consider, provide staff direction. You will also be considering potential ballot language. Once all of those decisions are made, we will put this together, and it will be, if the council's direction is to submit this to the people, then we will submit it to the clerk recorder's office to be on the November 2018 ballot. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Mr. William Berry of William Berry Campaigns. He's going to provide some information to you regarding the opinion survey that he did and his professional advice regarding elections.
Thank you.
Chief, could you just one more time go over those 4?
Yes,
for
ma'am.
clarification sake.
And then I have a question for you too.
Okay. It will be the percentage of the sales tax, whether
Yes.
it's a quarter, half, 3/4,
Right.
or 1. Duration of the proposed sales tax. Will it sunset? Will it go on for 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years? And then is the council's desire to have citizen oversight on how this money is spent? And if so, what does that oversight board look like? What is in the agenda packet is what was presented in 2016 that was known as Measure R. It's a template. It's a guide to take us to where we need to be. And then the last question that you need to ask is whether this, our answer, is this going to be a general tax or a specific tax?
So, and specifically tonight, you're looking for us to answer the 4 questions and then you'll come back with that direction after that, or is that something maybe William Berry could help us with?
I think
I mean, we're not here tonight to formulate this whole thing.
We need those 4 questions answered,
That's
and we will insert those into the ballot language. This has to get to the registrar of voters, though.
Yes.
So we don't have a long amount of time to do this. So, you know, if you can answer the 4 questions what you would like, we'll insert that language in there.
Councilmember Del Rosario and then Vice Mayor Goodson.
I think there was a public misunderstanding because an example was put in with the agenda that it was a 1% sales tax, and that had not been decided. The paperwork was an example of a tax initiative. It is not the final document.
We're looking for that guidance from our council, what you would like to see in this potential sales tax revenue measure.
Vice Mayor Goodson, then Councilmember Draper.
Yes, my question was in regards to, in the event that it was, it's my understanding, if it was general, that we would be looking at an oversight committee, but in the event, if we decided on a specificity, then that would null and void out that oversight committee.
I think either way, with the general mistrust around the country of government, it would be wise, in my opinion, to have that either way, just to ensure and to reassure people, even though, you know, we're using the money for what we were asked to use it for, it would probably still be wise to have that there. The meetings would certainly be much briefer.
And then I'm fine.
Thank you.
That answered my question too.
Okay, so does anybody else need a quick break? If not,
that would be nice. Yes.
do you mind? It's been a while, so we're gonna take a 5-minute recess, thanks.
8:30.
Just finished all my water.
I don't know. Let's see here. Stop recording. Yes, sir. No. I'm practicing. I have to practice again.
You're warming up.
Yeah. It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
Well, this is Jackie. She's just been hired as the assistant clerk. This is George Barry.
Nice to meet you.
He was in charge of Paradise Water, and now you're with
California Water Service.
Derek. It's D-E-R-E-K.
Enjoy it for a while.
I did.
D-E-R-E-K.
And then I went to work at Ridge Fitness for women in Paradise.
With Pittsburgh. Yeah. Oh yeah. Scott and I are at the same firm. He's on vacation, so I'm covering him. Okay. No problem. The censure? Nothing. I mean, it's just a statement from. It's a
for indulging us for a quick little break.
Absolutely.
William Berry.
Brazil?
Councilmember Thompson, we're ready.
Brazil? Wow. Huh. Oh, okay.
Okay, is everybody here? We're back from our recess. Thank you very much. Okay, so the item in front of us this evening is an important one. It's 7.1, to consider an ordinance and resolution for a local sales tax ballot measure. Mr. William Berry did some surveys for us, and he's doing the presentation this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening. We conducted a public opinion survey for the city during the week of June 3rd through the 11th. And there were really three primary things that we wanted to try to find out in the survey. The survey was done over the telephone. It was about 16 minutes in length. It was done of likely voters for the November election. So that was kind of the criteria. That was the subset of folks that we spoke with. We wanted to find out how people felt about, people who lived here, how they felt about living here in Oroville. We wanted to find out what their priorities would be if there were additional revenues, how they should be spent, and we wanted to get their feelings about a potential revenue measure for the city. How do you feel about living in Oroville? One of the first questions we asked is, do you believe that Oroville is on the right track, is going on the right direction or the wrong direction? And it's almost a coin toss. 41% right direction, 41.5% wrong direction. Which is, you know, that number is becoming more common to have the rising number of dissatisfied people. And by dissatisfied, I would say 10 years ago, that number is usually 2 or 3 to 1, right direction versus wrong direction. In the last 18 months, we've seen in our survey through cities, we've seen that number of wrong direction rising. Next question that we asked was, do voters feel a need for additional funding for the city? 70% thought there was a great need for additional funding.
And go to the next slide.
I'm sorry, repeat that?
Sure.
Oh, there it is. There you go.
70% felt there was a great, and I'm going to leave you with copies of all this.
Oh,
and this is only a subset of the questions that we asked. These are highlights. I'll leave you with detailed copies of all of them, the entirety of the survey.
Perfect.
Good.
70% thought there was a great need, 17% some need, 5.5% little need, no need was 2.7%. I went back and looked at surveys in the area over the last 4 to 5 years to try to glean if that great need number has risen. And while, like your previous presenter, I have not been able to find apples to apples comparisons, it does seem that the awareness of a need for additional funding is there with voters.
Mm-hmm.
Issues some people say may be problems for residents of the city of Oroville. We asked the question, I'm going to mention issues some people say might be problems for the residents of the city. After I mention each one, please tell me whether you consider it to be a very serious problem, somewhat serious problem, not too serious problem, or not a problem at all. The first one was crime in general. Very serious was 33.3. Somewhat serious, 51%. So clearly, over 80% put it into the serious category. The city streets in need of repair. 42% found that somewhat serious. 41% very serious. And those are really strong numbers, even for the very serious intensity level of the awareness of a need is there among voters.
It was 42.
I'm sorry, 42.5 was very serious, 41 somewhat serious. It is. It doesn't appear to have the numbers on it. Should I pass out this poster?
Oh, okay, yeah.
I would really like that.
That would be nice. We're writing instead of watching.
I have it on here.
It's a practice.
It's not. putting all of the information
Well, I
on
think
this
you can also
outline.
talk it through. I mean, it depends how long it takes to bring it up.
But I sure could
Thank
use
you.
this. Thank you so very much. That's much better.
Thank you.
Even if they don't have numbers, still hopefully have the slides up for the audience.
Oroville? All right.
Okay.
Should I continue?
Yeah.
So, the state budget cuts have reduced money available to cities for essential city services. 60% found that to be a very serious problem, the state budget cuts for essential city services such as police and fire. 60% found that very, 25% found that somewhat serious.
Mm-hmm.
And then this number blew off the charts. The number of homeless and transients in Oroville. 77%, by far and away, the largest issue was the homeless in Oroville. We're seeing that up and down the state. In Chico, and yes.
Now, the very serious problem is very serious problem we need to get rid of them, or a very serious problem we need to help them?
It depends on what's in the minds of the voter. But we asked them, what do you think is, the way that we asked the question was, I'm going to mention issues that people say may be a problem for the city of Oroville. Tell me if you find those to be very serious or somewhat serious. So that was how we asked them. So through the roof, homelessness. Then we wanted to ask them to rate various entities within the city. We asked them to give us if they had a favorable opinion, unfavorable, somewhat unfavorable, very unfavorable. We asked it of the city council. Very favorable was 10. Somewhat favorable was 25, so it's a 35 positive. Very unfavorable was 17. Somewhat unfavorable was 35. So basically it's a 35% positive, 35% negative, which really mirrors the right direction, wrong direction question. It's a coin flip. You had almost a quarter of the folks who had who were neutral, had no opinion. We asked about the fire department. 60% had a very favorable opinion of the fire department. 23%, 23.5% somewhat favorable. We did ask, and that's even better than most fire departments. We also asked about the police department, and that was a 33% very favorable and a 32% somewhat favorable. And again, I'll leave you the entirety of this report before I leave, so you have every question. This is the highlights that we're going over. Then we asked them a question as it may appear on the ballot. We asked them, question? Like many cities, Oroville may soon be facing budget shortfalls in the future. Voters in Oroville may be asked to vote on a few local ballot measures to address city funding. Let me read you the summary of a potential measure that the city of Oroville is considering. The City of Oroville Public Safety and Vital Services Protection Measure. To prevent cuts and restore essential public safety services, including 911 response, police officers, gang youth violence prevention, fire protection, emergency medical response, and other essential city services, including street repairs, youth and senior services, and park maintenance, shall the city enact a 1% sales tax, providing approximately $3,700,000 annually, with all revenue required to stay in the general fund, with local control, and independent annual financial audits. If the election were held today, would you vote yes or no on this measure? And the yes were 64.5%, and the no's were 20.5%. I compared this to your ballot measure 2 years ago. So I quadruple checked it. I sent it to a buddy of mine who does opinion surveys. He double checked the methodology. He double checked the sample size, the sample that we used. And this was the number, 64.5%. In the end, I'll go into a little bit more about what that means, but that's a positive place to be if you're looking to pass a general tax measure. I think it correlates with the awareness of a need for new revenue that we saw in the earlier question. The people who were no or undecided to that question, we asked them, all right, how about if it was a half a cent? Would you vote for it then? So of the
25%.
Of the 34% that were no or undecided at the 1 cent level, we asked how about if it was a half percent, and 57% of voters were still a no. 57% of the voters were still a no at half a cent. So dropping it.
That's 57% of the 30%.
Correct. 57% of the 30%. So dropping it did not significantly increase the support level. And that's not uncommon. There are a
20% said yes.
20% of the
%. I don't understand.
Half percent.
Sure. So we asked people at 1%.
There was 64%.
So there were 34% of the people who were either a no or undecided at 1%. 34% of those folks. So we said, what if it was half a percent? So 57.6% of those 34% were still a no.
But 20% were yes.
The yes went to 20.3%. Correct. 20 of that 34%.
34%.
Right.
Oh, of the 30.
Right.
Right.
Oh.
Right.
20%. So that means 84%.
Well, it's
no.
We're already at 64. That's maybe 68%.
Correct.
Yeah.
There you go.
Correct. And it's within the margin of error of the survey. I hope I didn't confuse you on that. I just wanted it was my way of showing that dropping the tax measure did not
make a difference to the people that were going to vote no anyway.
Right, and that is not uncommon. There is a percentage of people in every community, and that percentage differs community to community, that are vehemently anti-tax.
Right.
And you know the reasons are they think that government has enough money, and that you need to spend your money more wisely. And so really no argument that you give them, even reducing it to 0.1%, will move them. We wanted to get their opinion on where they think money should be spent if there was additional revenue. Take a look. The next, there we go. 59% wanted to repair, repave more streets. Thought that was a big item for them. If you take a look, we have it on a scale of 1 to 7 to try to gauge for intensity. 1 means that you are willing to pay, or not willing to pay for the project. 7 means you are very, very willing to pay for it. So if you take a look at just in terms of intensity, streets are a big deal. And voters wanted that addressed if there was additional revenue. Yes?
I have a question.
Sure.
Were the homeless mentioned at all in this?
Well, they were.
I know that they were before, but I mean, in this, what needs to be taken care of? Did anybody mention that the homeless?
No.
No,
Nope.
I didn't think so.
Primarily because that's a reason why I wasn't asked, because that's a very complex subject. that doesn't lend itself well to simple public perception answers. We can find out if they think it's a problem, but if you go into the details of what they think should be done, you probably get some numbers that really wouldn't be of much value.
Right, right.
So you take a look and you see that streets are a big concern. Next slide. We wanted to give them some arguments against the tax measure. You know, one that we gave was there's already taxes are already too high. By voting no on this measure, we can finally get some tax relief. That had no effect to 38% of the voters. It had some effect on 34% of the voters, either much more or slightly more inclined to vote against the measure because of that argument, because taxes are already too high. We gave them some additional information about what a potential tax measure may be, that it would be going to put more police on the streets, that crime has risen lately in Oroville, and this measure is needed to help lower the crime rate and make Oroville a safe place to live, run a business, and raise a family. We said that the city of Oroville has a backlog of millions of dollars worth of street and road maintenance projects. This measure is needed to repair potholes and prevent local streets from deteriorating further. We gave more positive and some more negative information about the tax measure. And then we asked them again, if the election were held today, and we read the tax measure ballot to them again, how would you vote for it? And 65% remained yes. Undecided was 16, no's were 18.5. I know what your vote total was 2 years ago. I acknowledged it to both Tom and to Bill that I wanted to take a couple of days and triple check the numbers. We did. We used all best practices from the American Association of Public Opinion and Research. I've done hundreds of these surveys for local governments up and down California. And I have a 95% confidence level. If you were to do the survey again, you would get the same results.
Could you?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
Could you remind us of what that vote was? I think it was 41% in favor?
43.7%. Is that right? 43.7% in November 2016 were yes votes.
Favor.
So you added 20 percentage points, which is why my ears pricked up. But then just kind of the, besides doing the triple checking, the fact that the homeless number rose through the roof kind of corresponds anecdotally to what I've heard from some of the staff and some of the folks that I've talked to around Oroville, that is at this moment a hot button, high awareness issue. So that kind of seemed to lend some more credibility to the survey results. Now, some caveats. Opinion surveys are not predictions. If you were to put this on a ballot in November, as is, I have no idea what it would get. What I do know is that when we had a captive audience of likely Oroville voters, and they were given information about the tax measure, both the cost, what it would be used for, some negatives about the potential tax measure, probably a 3 or 4 to 1 positive to negative, that when they heard that information today, 65% were supportive of the measure. Ballot measures, whether they're a tax measure or whether they are just a regular ballot initiative, always start high and they drop as the campaign goes on, as organized opposition mounts, as people become more aware of an election. If you were to place a measure on the ballot, I would think that the city needs to do extensive voter education and outreach to let people know the facts of the measure. I also think that you will probably need to have an independent committee organically form on its own that would campaign on behalf of the measure. The city can never advocate on behalf of a tax. It can only educate and inform. A citizens committee can absolutely advocate. And my suggestion would be, should you move forward, a general sales tax. You're not over 2/3. and 2/3 is a tough road to hoe at any point. I went back and researched 30 years of tax measures in California, city tax measures, and I was not able to find one example of where a city ran and lost a general tax measure and then came back and placed a special measure on the ballot and won. That was over 30 years of research. Wasn't able to find one.
Did you find anywhere they put a general tax on again?
Yes.
In one?
City of Mary, a client of mine, City of Marysville. So that's not uncommon. I think sometimes cities learn from mistakes or are able the second time to answer questions that were outstanding that needed to be answered. My second recommendation would be, I don't see a need for a sunset date. I think it can be something that would be can be in place until voted out by voters. There's mechanisms for voters to end a utility tax. There's mechanisms in any sort of tax. The situation that you find yourself in, from what I gather, is not an acute situation. It is it's a state of being right now for the city. And it is not only for the city of Oroville. As you talk to your brothers and sisters and council members up and down the state, there was 111 local funding measures on the ballot last month. 111.
Wow.
I also say no sunset date because we didn't test it and it wasn't necessary to get the 65% in the survey. We didn't have to have a sunset date. And of the tax measures that passed last June, a month ago, only one had a sunset date. One out of, I think it was 40. And then I do suggest that you have a citizens oversight committee, one that at least gives tax transparency to this process,
right.
some sunlight into the process of where the money is being spent and how the money is being spent, and that whether it be through annual audits, biannual audits, whether it be through however you want to do it. I know staff has some recommendations. I think there needs to be a citizens oversight component of this.
And what is the percentage suggestion?
1%.
All right.
So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
That's exactly what we put on the ballot last time and we lost.
In all, in all due respect, I think your ballot measure last time was poorly written. I also think that I think it was very poorly written. I don't think that was anybody's fault. I just think it was put on there. I think you didn't do a survey prior to the last tax measure, and so you weren't able to address maybe some of the issues that the citizens wanted. I also don't think that I think more heavy lifting needs to be done in communicating the needs of the measure. And I think there's maybe some external factors that led into the no vote only getting 43.7%. You can't just put this on the ballot and think it's going to get the 65%. It's going to be, it's much more, it's easy, it's simple, just not easy. So, I would suggest different language, but the same parameters as last time.
Well, I also feel that something that attributes to the increase in the percentage of wanting a tax measure is our city within the past 2 years since that last measure people have seen the dire straits, and we are struggling, and everyone is feeling those challenges individually and collectively. It's in our face now.
Absolutely. I will say that what I have found in doing almost 100 of these surveys is that the number one word, if there was one thing I could say, what's the most important thing in passing a tax measure? It's the word trust.
Yeah, they don't trust.
And that starts with you, folks that you work with. To the folks here in the audience, is there a level of trust? And they have to trust that there's a need. They have to trust that you looked elsewhere to address that need. They have to trust that you are, that this measure will specifically address those needs and that you will do what you promised you will do. And cities that satisfy those four things pass these measures. Cities of Marysville, who had tried and took 43.5% the first time and lost, they took some measures, both as a council and as a community, to build trust in a fairly quick fashion. And they were able to get, I think, almost 60% yes vote when we worked with them.
Is
But
that because they implemented the oversight committee?
it's not just it's not, you know, it's not just one thing.
All right.
That was certainly part of it. I think part of it was their ballot measure was focused in terms of the. I think you need to talk to people the way that people talk, as opposed. You know, no offense, but a lot of you use
Right. I agree.
bureaucratic
with that.
speak that I don't understand, and I've been to thousands of these meetings.
Right.
I think you need to talk to people. I think you need to listen to people. I think there needs to be a rabbit ears phase in which you listen to what people have to say. You want to be all ears. I think all that's important. I know Bill and Tom and probably most of you have been talking to community members about this and getting their input about this. And I certainly have both positive and negative. And that's important because the people who oppose this aren't wrong. They have absolutely every reason for their concerns. Are you able to build a level of trust back up with them? So my professional opinion is 1% general, no sunset, citizens oversight, and then as a sidebar, do those things that build trust between not council members and voters, but do those things that build trust between people. Because a lot of people have a lot of their lives in your hands, and you're going to make some promises with a tax measure that you're going to make their, a little bit of their life better. So that's mine.
So, Janet, are you in the queue, or is it just still there? I have one question that I know is going to come up in one of the speakers that's coming up. But the utility tax has been brought up in the past that we're one of the few communities that charge that, and of course it's been around for quite a while. And so, is there anything that you can address to that? Because for us to take that away, obviously, is a big hit.
Right.
So can you address a
Sure.
little bit of that, because you've done this up and down the state?
Sure. Over half of Californians pay utility tax. So while I think it's something about 25, and you probably know better the number of cities that have it, over half of the population lives in a municipality in which a utility tax is charged. And
so even though it might be a low number percentage of cities,
exactly.
It's half of the population of the state of California.
Exactly. So over half the population. And I will say that every day that goes, every election year, more cities are putting them on the ballot. There has been several this past June that they attempted to repeal that were defeated. Appeal of a utility tax. South Pasadena has one on the ballot this coming November, a repeal of their utility tax. And there is now a well-organized, well-funded campaign, community campaign, to stop the repeal of it. So nobody likes taxes. It's a matter of what they're getting for the tax. And so I do know that, take 30 seconds here just to take a quick look at the number of utility taxes that were on the ballot last. Let's see here. Utility taxes. Yeah, it looks like there were 3, and all. Let's see here. Burbank had one. It passed at 81% a utility tax. Long Beach had one. It passed. Rialto and San Bernardino County had one. It passed. And one did lose. That was Parley in Fresno County. So there were 4 utility users tax on the ballot. There was 5 rather. The 5th one was for a community services district, Isla Vista, and that passed.
So why do people add a utility tax?
Why do they?
Yeah. Why do communities?
Additional revenue. Simple. I mean, it's simple as that. I'm working with the city of McFarland right now. I don't know if you ever saw the movie McFarland, USA, in Fresno and Kern County. And if they were to put a sales tax measure on the ballot, it would probably generate about $40. There's no business there. It's not a place in which retail is done. But there's will be paying utility tax in order to fund the services that sales tax just doesn't.
Right.
For McFarland, the key was to let folks know where their tax money goes. You know, where their sales tax money goes, how much goes to the state, how much is kept here.
Right.
Property tax, how much goes, how much stays.
Right.
That was the key for McFarland to be able to pass a utility tax. So in my mind, it's a way to get revenue when a sales tax is not going to generate significant revenue to pay for services.
Mayor?
Yes, sir.
I was just going to ask you a quick question. Are there any cities or municipalities that have a break for low-income senior citizens with the utility tax?
With the utility tax?
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I don't know them off the top of my head, but absolutely.
City of Chico.
City of Chico.
Yeah, Chico does. Okay.
So that's something we could look into.
Yes, I was going to suggest that. First, I was going to suggest that it's probably time to take the public comments.
Right.
It
Okay.
seems like we're getting into the weeds. But second of all, I think it is reasonable to look at other alternatives if this were to pass, including, for example, senior citizen utility discount.
So Councilmember Thompson has a question, then I'm going to open this up for public hearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you
and you're
very
going to
much.
stick around in case somebody has
Absolutely,
questions for
I
you.
will.
Thank
And
you.
very nice job.
Thank you.
I know, it was a great job.
Yeah.
Great job.
Yeah, thank you. Question for you and maybe for our attorney. You know, actually, personally, I'm not opposed to the idea of repealing the utility and adding the 1%. The reason being is everybody knows that our city limits are a mess, in my opinion. You know, you have the squirrel and the moose or whatever, and you have people that are living, you know, in this Oroville area, you have about 53,000, and then within city limits, you have 18 from my numbers. All of those people use the streets. We all use, you know, the only thing necessarily that the people outside of city limits don't necessarily fully use is our police and our fire, but they still use a lot of assets of our community. And actually some of the crime that people who live in the community, you know, some of those crimes for people who live out in the county, they happen within city limits. So our police have to bear the burden of crimes that are happening from people who live in the county. So you have a large portion right now of the citizens paying for, you know, the needs of really an area that's using. So having, in my opinion, I would love to see, I'm not sure the possibility of it, of having one measure where you have both the reversal and the placement of the 1%. I think if that was in place with everything else that you mentioned, especially non a sunset date, I think that you'd have a lot of citizens in the community see that as more of a fair option of having Oroville as a whole taking the burden of what the needs are for Oroville as a whole, as opposed to putting a lot of the burden on people who live in this weird city limits.
I'm not a lawyer. I know there's a single issue, per ballot.
I think because the fear would be, okay, if we put one measure on the ballot to repeal, and then another measure to add, potentially you could just shoot yourself in the foot and remove and not add. So, you know, that would be, as I don't necessarily see how as city council, I don't see that moving forward, but I would love to see the option of doing the one together, because I believe that would pass with flying colors with people who live in city limits.
So again, my suggestion is, I
We
really
open
think
it to-
council get into the weeds in
Right.
terms of what you'd like to formulate. It'd be really good to hear from the public and then take it back to council for further discussion.
How much would a
Thank you.
1% tax bring in? Approximately
It's about 3.5 million.
3.5, 3.6, and our utility tax is 1.8 million.
1.845
1.845.
million.
So we'll get
Okay,
a little over.
we need to open this for, let's
Okay.
do that after we hear from the public, so then we can hear their comments and then we can make more discussions.
Okay.
Thank you. So this is now open for public hearing. Anybody that wishes to speak on this item can fill out a blue card. And I'm going to ask that you approach the podium and state your name clearly into the microphone and give your 3 minutes. And the first person is our wonderful Mr. Steve Christensen. And then after that, it's August. And then Bobby O'Reilly, and then Alan Young.
Mayor, council, staff, guests, thank you, Mr. Barry. I was worried you'd leave immediately after this thing got going. But I appreciate your delivery. I thought it was very good. One comment about Marysville. They passed their sales tax measure in the primary 2 years ago. Seems like it was by 206 votes, if I remember right. But a Marysville councilman told me that they did a little compromise. There was an outcry against the red light ticket coming off the bridge, red light camera, and they decided to do away with that to gain favor. So compromise can work. 3 years ago, I suggested get rid of the utility tax, gain money, get rid of it, go for the sales tax. I would have supported it then. I stand by that. I'll go for 1% sales tax if you simultaneously repeal the utility tax. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is August Lincoln. And then Bobby O'Reilly, be ready. You're next.
August Lincoln, Mayor, Council. I look at my property tax bill, and this is another tax that can be slapped on me as a citizen of Oroville. If the people get educated on how many taxes they pay, they'll be disgusted. For instance, on my tax bill, well, if you live in the city of Oroville, you pay bonds for Butte College. They have 4 bonds. The Oroville School District has 3 bonds. Termalito has 1. So you're paying 8 bonds. At the end of this year, for the 2018-2019, Butte College will add another bond. So that's going to be 9 bonds on your tax bill. Termalito right now is trying to get a bond issue on the November election. So what we're doing here is you're taxing us to death. Not only you, the whole state. I don't understand. Our income level here at Oroville, not even close to Paradise and Chico. You all know it. You all see how dirty the city is, how run down everything is. It's the fault of us, and it's all your fault. But raising taxes is not going to help us. We pay enough taxes already. Just look at your tax bill when you get it. And one more question, is this just an informal meeting, or is this the final, or are you going to have a second meeting?
This is, we're directing, you go ahead and finish your time, August.
So this is just a formal?
This is a public hearing this evening.
Informal, or are we going to have a second meeting on this again?
Public hearings are handled in 2 sessions, and so this is the first of 2.
Okay.
Thank you.
you.
Bobby O'Reilly, and then Alan Young. Is Alan still
here? Good evening yet again. I will stay as positive as I can this time. So some things were mentioned about this this initiative for the ballot. One of which was to, educate voters, talk to the voters. But my suggestion would also be to educate and talk to everybody, non-voters, voters alike, because if we face reality, the young people who do take the moment to vote, or anybody for that matter. Word of mouth is huge. Word of mouth is beyond anything that we can imagine. Social media, in my opinion, comes up next. One of the problems that was floating around social media for this the last time and into discussion for this time was the utility tax, and there not being anything set for the funding. I personally understand that the general fund needs funding, and a lot of the opinion of the public was that they need to appropriate all the funds for public safety, and that's just not feasible. But if you were to look at taking off the utility tax or repealing the utility tax, that would satisfy those who are paying a lot of taxes, such as Mr. Augustine. So they're not paying extra taxes or more taxes on top of taxes. You'd actually take one away to add another. That wouldn't be much different. The other thing would be to set the word slipped my mind at the moment, but to set a specific area as to where a percentage of the funds from this 1% would go into public safety. And I think you would win over quite a lot of the naysayers from the last time we went through this. That's just my opinion from what I've seen and experienced and talked to and seen the polls and the comments going across social media and so forth and so on.
Mayor, I do need to clarify, this would be the action evening if you were to put it on the ballot, because it has to be the county. They have to put it on their next meeting, I believe, to consolidate. Right. So this would be the action item.
Right. Thank you. That was Bobby O'Reilly. So Stephanie, and then Alan Young, it looks like he's gone. So the last person would be Randy Murphy.
So I just looked up that our current sales tax rate is 7.25, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. So the increase to 8.25. Okay. I am from the Bay Area, and to me, this is still a great tax rate. I'm sorry if anybody else feels like they're being taxed to death, but you know, if you it really is all how you look at something, right? If you get your property tax bill and you look at each and every item as a burden and as, you know, something that you have no control over and you hate it, of course you're gonna have that kind of an attitude. But if you look at it as, you know, our commitment to our community and the way that we are all able to contribute for the betterment of that community. And I realize it's just a point of view, but it can make a big difference. And we're talking about dire straits financially for the city. We're talking about potholes that affect our cars on a daily basis. The crime rate, having more of a police presence, safety, fire, all things that are very much a good investment for our community. And I think that the gentleman was very, very correct when he said that it's a matter of trust. And so being as transparent as possible and accessible, like he said, the wording of the measure should be, you know, as little legalese as possible, and something that, you know, everybody can understand, even if they just walk up to vote and stand and, you know, read it in that moment and on the spot. So as far as repealing the utility tax, I can't imagine why we would do that. That to me is, I beg you, please don't even consider that. That is money that we still do need, and it will only benefit and help our community. But like you said, offering discounts for low income and seniors is a great idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. The last person is Randy Murphy, and if there's anybody else that wishes to speak, I'm going to make one more offer, and then I'll close public hearing. Thank you. Mr. Murphy?
Thank you. Good evening. I just had a couple of questions for the consultant. One was the number 300 was used proportionally. What was that to the total of the most recent registered voters to determine whether or not that's statistically valid? I'm sure he knows that. Secondarily, were those 300 attempts or 300 responses? Thirdly, were the phone calls to landlines or a combination of landlines and cell phones? Because obviously today's society, majority of people do not have or significant, particularly younger folks, don't have landlines. This may be in the study, but I did not see any discussion about demographics. What were the age ranges? What were the, again, these are all things that could significantly impact the vote. If you hit 300 people that just landlines, you're going to look at a cross-section of most of the people in this room. It does not include very many young people. So just food for thought. A comment that I have regarding the recommendation to do education, absolutely. My master's thesis was based on that. And you need to educate, and again, as was pointed out in the initiative, the Measure R before, very little, if any, education that I saw on the issue, and certainly impacted the results. And lastly, assuming that this measure passes, I volunteer to be on the Citizens Oversight Committee.
Thank you. Okay, this is the last call. This is a public hearing. Item number 7.1 is a public hearing on this evening's agenda. Anybody else? Seeing none, public hearing is closed. Now this is the time for the council to debate and take action on the item 7.1 on the agenda this evening. I do have a question for the city attorney. A couple things came up that crafting it one of two ways. If it included a reduction of the utility tax or an elimination of the utility tax or a senior citizen discount on the, or other verbiage for that on the utility tax, can that be combined in the sales tax? So it's either one or all or nothing.
We can't do that tonight because that's not drafted and that hasn't been noticed on the agenda.
Okay.
So all we can do is take action on what is presented as the resolution for the transaction and use tax, otherwise known as a sales tax, or the ordinance. We can tinker with some of the verbiage in the resolution and in the ordinance, but I note that generally transaction and use taxes are subject to revenue and tax code. So there's a whole state regime that governs those. So as a practical matter, there's
language simple. So I'm sorry, are you talking about the utility tax?
The utility tax is not on the agenda tonight.
Right, okay.
So we can't, in other words, I understand where the council's coming from, which is let's repeal one and adopt the other. And that may very well be presentable to the public, but from a practical standpoint, that's not agendized this evening. And, I know that whether it's myself or Mr. Huber, we would need time to actually, we couldn't do that on the fly right here and now. We'd have to actually, go back to our computers and draft that up.
I would say two or three things. One is, if that were the direction of council, you can always have a special meeting. You just have to make sure you meet the deadlines. The attorney has to be able to work on it, and it has to get consolidated with the election. To answer Mr. Murphy's question, which is really why I wanted to jump in, there were 300 responses. It was a combination of landlines and cell phones.
Okay. Okay, what's the Councilmember Thompson's in the queue?
Just the question in regards to, is it possible to have one measure that has both an addition and a repeal of the utility tax?
Our consultant referenced what I believe he meant and what I know as an attorney as the single subject rule. Initiatives, whether state or local in California, can only cover one subject. What I will tell you is that there's some gray area, but that courts generally work very hard to construe an initiative to embrace a subject. In other words, judges don't like to throw out initiatives on technicalities. They really, really don't. So my sense is that probably we could, because what we're dealing with is the overall subject of taxation and revenue raising. And if we're going to adopt one tax, but we're worried that that would be too much because we have this other tax, and so we had one initiative that dealt with both, my personal view is that probably would get past a single subject challenge. I can't tell you that that's a 100% confidence level answer, but certainly I would say that's in maybe the high 80s.
There's also another way to accomplish the same thing if council were interested in it, whether it's a senior citizen discount or whatever you'd like to do.
Or both.
And that is, at a future meeting, you could
Yeah.
adopt an ordinance which did that, which would become effective after the election.
Right.
If it failed, you'd repeal that. So
Right.
you could do a two-step to get there.
That is exactly what we were just saying.
Great.
And since most of our city, I mean, a lot of people are senior citizens here, myself included, I think it would be wise to limit it to low-income senior citizens, and that might be a way to approach it. But, yeah.
So the question tonight for the council is the percentage, how long, city oversight, general or specific.
Correct.
And we had our consultant give us his opinion, and I believe he did a very good job. So what's the pleasure of the council?
Well, I like what the consultant had to say, and I think 1% with a citizen oversight committee and for a general tax, and
No
that works
sunset?
for me.
Is that a motion?
No sunset.
Is that a motion?
Well, did you want to discuss it further?
Yeah, I'm sorry, request.
You're in there. You're in there.
Nice. I'm in agreements with that, but my thought process is in continuing on with the dialogue at a different meeting to also discuss in whatever way we do it, a repeal and a low-income senior discount.
And you certainly can do that.
Okay, sounds good.
I second.
There's a first and second.
Okay.
Voting will be open in a moment.
General.
It was general, yeah. Yeah.
1%.
The second was
1%, no sunset clause, a city,
Citizen oversight.
citizen oversight committee,
And a
and a
general
general sales tax.
And who was the second?
Oh, you want to?
Janet was the second.
Oh, Jack was the second.
He's not in the queue.
Motion by Councilmember Draper, seconded by Vice Mayor Goodson. And my understanding then is the ballot question, you would strike the word that automatically expires in 6 years, and the rest of the ballot question would remain the same?
Well, actually,
And then how would that affect the ordinance? Would that affect the ordinance document that's the exhibit?
actually, there's,
So we'd have to strike operative date, language from the operative date section in 3.18?
my recommendation is, are we accepting the written ordinance as written? Because the recommendation from the consultant was that it was poorly written.
It's got to
So
be
we need to
revised.
rewrite the ordinance with those in it?
It needs to be revised.
I think it's actually the
User-friendly.
ballot measure that's the critical
Yeah,
part.
the ballot, I was talking about
As
the ballot
opposed to the
measure
ordinance.
language in the resolution.
Well, so just so we're clear, when you adopt the resolution and ordinance tonight, that's what goes to the elections
The county.
officials. So if we're going to change this, we need to do that tonight. Now, usually I think what our consultant may be talking about is the ballot language. And so, this
So-
is what he's provided. You know, I think it wouldn't be difficult to make a motion to substitute this language
Right.
in the resolution. And then the city clerk can, and I can verify, I can work with the city clerk. So if you have this in front of you and you want to make a motion, as part of your motion, add this as the ballot language, I think that's pretty easy to do.
He's bringing it over, and Linda can possibly read it.
I'll redo it, yeah.
Oh, it's section 3.1.
And Janet,
They want to take a 5-minute.
Vice Mayor Goodson?
And yes, I felt that I just wanted to hear from Mr. Hadley.
Well, I just know what happened the last time, and
when you put a no sunset clause on here, then what you've done is the same as your utility user tax, because it has no sunset. But if we're gonna come back and get rid of it, you know, then the money that, the 1.8 million that generates, has to be made up out of this revenue here. So, you're taking 1.8 million away, and I understand you're getting 3.5 million in return, but
Actually not.
if you left the utility user tax on, then you would be adding an additional 3.5 to get the city in a better financial position. And look, to me, would I trade 1.8 million for 3.5 in my own personal life out of my own pocket? All day long. But if I had to look into the future and say, okay, the difference of that 1.8 million, what does that look like in bodies? And what I'm talking about are employees. So I just want to make sure that we understand you're going to lose 1.8 million right off the top if we do this way. And yeah, you'll have the 3.5, but at any time, something can come back and say, you know what, we get enough people coming in and saying, well, you know, this sunset, I think that's going to hurt us not having a sunset on it, to be honest with you. But if you put a sunset on it, you certainly wouldn't want to get rid of the utility user tax, because that would just, I mean, now you're just shooting yourself in the foot 5 years down the road, because that 1.8 million is going to be gone forever, because the chances you getting that back would be slim and none. So you just have to, you know, to be real honest with you, I'm real torn. I don't like general taxes where it's at the whim of 5 people that can do, or 4 sometimes, but when it's revenue, it's 5 people that can take and do whatever they want with the money. There's nothing really put in stone that says, like a general or like a specific tax would be that you have to use it for this. You don't have any choice in this. And it's too bad that a general tax, you couldn't say, well, we're going to take X number of those dollars, and that's where it's going to be. That's what we're telling the people we're going to use it for, and it's right here in writing. That's where it's going. Now this other, we'll look at roads or we'll do whatever and come to some agreement on that. But then now you're right back, I would think the attorney will tell us that we're right back to a specific tax. So this is a tough one for me. It really is, because as much as I don't like paying taxes, but I pay just like everybody else, and I don't like my tax bills either, but you know, I understand the reasoning, and I live here, and even though I don't use police services or fire services and that kind of stuff, I still understand that you know, I have to help pay for them. So I don't know. I'm torn on this one. Really, I am. The general tax and the no sunset. Those are tough for me. Real tough for me right now, and I'm still deciding one way or the other.
Mayor, if possible, the chief's asked for about a 5-minute break. I think he wants to clarify some things in the ordinance, if that's possible.
Okay. So, yeah, the other question that I had is about the future value of money. When Art brings it up about not having a sunset clause, you know, so originally we thought about having a 6 years, but 6 years out, what's the community going to look like, and what's the value of money and the cost of keeping up the city? And I hear what you're saying, but once we get it, it's projecting and moving forward our community in a right direction, and then to have that taken away, I think will be very difficult, especially with the unknown of what CalPERS is doing. The other thing
in hiring people based on temporary money.
Right, which is tough for me. But we're gonna take a recess in the middle of public hearing.
I think we're done with the hearing, actually, and the point would be to make sure we clarify the language in the ordinance and resolution before you finally vote. I think that's the reason.
Oh, Vice Mayor Goodson?
I just wanted to say one thing that is I feel is extremely important. Whether this sales tax measure was brought up or not, please remember that 70 to 75% of our general fund budget goes to public safety, and that's without an oversight committee. So I just needed to remind you of that. We're very conscientious of that need, and we certainly do make every effort to supply that. 70 to 75% of the general fund annually and consistently comes out of the general fund to fund our public safety.
Which is a breaking point. I mean, that
Yes.
is a breaking point.
Yes.
And actually, we were just discussing restructuring again of City Hall, and what are we going to do?
Yeah.
And how are we going to do it? And the restructuring of, with or without a city administrator, with or without another director.
Planner.
Our city, and then it's like, what does it look like? And if we can't survive on this, then the next step is, and we're going to start. We actually talked about it. We're going to do it again. Back when we had the budget cuts originally, and we put all of the jobs and all of the people on a screen. We're going to do that here, and you're going to put the real bodies on there, and it's like, okay, what are we going to cut next? What and now it's down to what services. Not just people,
right?
But services, because there's only 2 and 3 people left in a department. So you remove the department because you just can't do it anymore. And this is where we are. And in an interview, we were all at Smart and Final this morning, and a couple of us were interviewed about this very subject, and we just can't do it anymore. And what I ended up saying was, we can't be, we as city council members make the best decisions that we can year after year. And when CalPERS, health insurance is what health insurance is, but when CalPERS took our employees' hard-earned money and invested it so poorly that they took a loss, they should be in jail for that. It's a fiduciary responsibility that they are supposed to invest each and every dollar according to what your risk factor is. And the reality is they invested it so poorly and made such poor investments, but the law says because they made poor investments, now they can expect us to pay it back. And so now they're expecting us, it's like a bond. They're expecting us to pay back their mistake, and on the backs of our employees, on our city, and frankly, our citizens. But what I'm asking at this time is this is like what Stephanie says. This is the time your community needs you. Because, sure, have we made some bad decisions? We have. Have we made some decisions that maybe we shouldn't have made? Yes, we have. But overall, the responsibility of making CalPERS poor investment judgment, it's affecting our community to the point that are we going to let them ruin our community? I would say not. And that's how I look at this. And Stephanie said it really well. This is the time to take a look at your community and say, I'm willing to help. And 8.25% is really not out of line for the services that we deserve in this community. 7.25% is below the state average. I'm tired of being below average. We deserve more than that. So.
Well said.
And we're still waiting for Chief Lagrone. So do we just move on? Did he want to clarify something?
So I'm in the queue.
Janet Goodson and Del
You know,
Rosario.
I was just reading this, and when we're having to always make tough decisions, and so when we talk about we're going back to the drawing board, we're going to just have a PowerPoint that's just up there with the facts. This is what our services look like. This is what it's going to look like with 10% more budget cuts and without generating revenue. Our parks and street, correct me if I'm wrong, we went from 13 people to 6 people. And so we have 3 in each to cover the whole city. It's not working, and our staff is burnt out.
Okay, so we've got some
If I say something?
Yes, go right ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. I'm in the queue.
You are.
Okay. I'm a little upset by the fact that we were told that there was no public education. That's not true. We held meetings and people didn't come to them. Bill Lagrone was everywhere talking about it. We tried very hard to educate the people about it. But if we don't have 100% of the council behind this measure, it's never going to pass. We have to be 100% behind it, and we all have to be talking about it in a positive way. If we're not, we might as well forget about putting it on the ballot because it won't pass.
Absolutely.
So what the chief was doing was simply making sure the language matched what you had said. And I think if we give him a couple minutes, but I can tell you what the 2 changes are, at least that I see. And
okay.
Actually, that Joanna saw. And that's in the ordinance 3.18.050, which is the second page. And we would simply drop the last 6 or 7 words. So it'd stop with in said area, because right now it says for 6 years. So that would be dropped.
Right.
And then the argument language, the ballot language would be as it's been handed out. And then under section 11 of the resolution, it says 500 words and it should say 300. Those are the changes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that I think is consistent with the motion on the floor.
Okay.
Well, I actually know it's consistent with the motion on the floor.
Right.
So do you want me to redo that motion? Are you ready?
So I actually have a question really quickly. And Mr. Berry, have you read the ordinance that was written before?
Yes.
And what's your opinion of that ordinance?
I didn't think it was sufficient.
So based on how the beginning of the meeting, and we have just found this information out.
Clarify myself if I can. What I did not feel was sufficient was the 75 word
Okay.
That was my draft.
Right.
To replace the draft that was used 2 years ago.
So the actual ordinance that he's speaking of, or the ballot measure.
Actually, you're speaking to all 3. So you're speaking to the ordinance, the resolution, and the ballot language. All 3 would need to be adopted.
And perhaps I can clarify. The 75 words goes in the resolution. It's a very complicated package, but what you do is you draft the ordinance that will codify the text of the sales and use tax in the ordinance in our city code, and that ordinance to me looks like the standard ordinance. I'm doing this in one of my cities. It looks like the right ordinance to me. I know Mr. Huber drafted that, and I looked at it. It looks good. You also draft the resolution. The resolution has all the text about calling the election. That's where you have the 75 words, and the 75 words is what the voters will read when they go to the ballot. I know that I'm going through this right now in one of my cities, and we have gone through, I can't tell you how many drafts of that 75 word ballot call. So I think what our consultant is saying is with that language in the resolution, he feels it is superior to what was presented to the voters 2 years ago.
Okay.
But the ordinance itself is a bunch of legal, technical mumbo jumbo.
Right.
It's
Okay.
not going to change.
I just want to make sure that we're making all the corrections tonight, and we don't move forward with poor language according to our consultant. So if this is read tonight as the ballot initiative,
As a 75-word ballot question.
And that's what goes in the resolution.
No.
no, it is different.
And so it's my understanding that the ordinance language, that verbiage is what it is.
Yes.
It can't be user-friendly. We can't make any revisions. Okay, but with the resolution,
Because it's going in our code.
All right.
You know, it's code language, and
Yes.
so it needs to be precise. and
Bill,
technical.
Okay.
can you
Yes.
read your recommended ballot language, please?
Absolutely. City of Oroville Public Safety and Vital Services Protection Measure. To prevent cuts to Oroville's police patrols and fire department protection. Restore vital public safety services, including 911, firefighter, paramedic, and emergency medical response times. Reduce gang and drug-related crimes. Address homelessness problems. Fix and repair local streets, roads, and potholes. Shall the city enact a 1-cent sales tax, providing approximately $3.6 million annually until ended by voters, requiring annual independent audits, citizens oversight, with all funds spent locally, be adopted. It has to be one sentence, so I apologize if it seems like it's a run-on.
So be adopted without a question mark, right?
Be adopted, question mark.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you added the word approximately after
Right.
tax
Oh, did I?
providing a 1% sales tax providing approximately.
So it's,
Is that one word too many now?
No,
Okay. But you added that when you were speaking.
oh, is that right?
Yes.
and you also added address homelessness problems.
Yeah, with an S.
I would do it as I wrote it. Problem, homelessness problem.
And providing 3.6 million, is it approximate or what?
Approximately, you have to
It is
do an
gonna be
approximate amount, so
approximate,
approximately
right.
3.6 million annually.
And so we could say address the homeless problem or homelessness problem.
Yeah, I think it was right near that word.
Okay, and then approximately. Okay.
I mean, the reason for the semicolons and the run-on sentences is because it does have to be one sentence.
So in a general sense, you have addressed in here a sunset, because what you're saying is until ended by voters.
Correct.
So that's in a broad sense of the word.
All right. Linda, are you want to?
Okay, I'll give this a try.
She's the wordsmith.
Marlene, did you have something else to say?
No, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Okay.
I do.
Councilmember Thompson does.
So my yes in today, what I would ask the council to agree upon for future meetings is to set up, I think we have next week, we're meeting next Tuesday.
Well,
Yes.
actually, at this point, we don't unless you want it, but remember, you literally have months before November and people vote, so if you want to talk about things like the utility tax, you have time to do it. It doesn't have to be done.
And it doesn't have to be done tonight.
Right.
But
Or
I would
next week.
ask for another counselor to second a motion for that to be put on
I
the
second.
agenda. Thank you. That I'm fine with voting yes.
All right.
Put on the agenda.
Yes.
And
We do have a motion and second on the floor, and I could read it back to you as I understand it. Councilmember Draper made a motion to approve the resolution with a 1% tax with no limit on the duration, with the Citizen Oversight Committee as a general tax, and to insert the consultant's language into the resolution and strike what was presented. And to
approve the ordinance.
Yep, you need to adopt the approve the ordinance, which is 1828, and to, with the attorney's approved version by the attorney that would eliminate any reference to this 6-year sunset.
Okay. And the
Got that?
second?
Yes, second.
Okay.
And change the resolution to 300 words.
Right, and that the arguments would be 300 words, not 500.
Okay.
And that's a motion and a second.
Did you get all of that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, she
And,
got it.
and then I just piggybacked off of.
Right, and then we will schedule
so
for a
we'll-
future agenda discussion the utility tax.
But we
have to
actually
vote.
have to do the one motion first and then the second
Right.
motion.
Okay, so we're gonna vote on the first one.
Okay. I thought it was direction versus, since we're just putting it on an agenda.
You're right, it is. It's
So I
direction
didn't think we
put it
needed to
the
vote on that
agenda.
one.
Okay.
So this is voting on the sales tax on the ballot, just so everybody's clear what they're voting on.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna vote. I'm waiting to see how Hatley votes.
All waiting for Listen, you guys, we've been here a long time.
Oh. Yes.
All votes are in. Does anybody wish to change? No. Voting's closed.
And it carried unanimously.
Yes. Thank you so
That
very
was
much.
the end. Thank you very much. That was the end of public hearing. Now we're moving on to regular business. Hopefully, there's only one item. It's 8.1. Consider approving the City of Oroville's response to the 2017-18 interim Butte County Grand Jury Report. Speaker, we do have a speaker. Does anybody have anything, any questions or comments from the dais? Seeing none, open it to a speaker. Mr. O'Reilly. Thank you. Looking for a motion?
Where is it? There it is.
Second.
First and second.
There you go.
Voting's open.
Okay, who, would you mind?
Well, where did mine go?
Oh, you didn't get a copy?
Could you,
Isn't that supposed to be on the agenda?
All votes are in. Does
what,
anybody
who
wish to
did the
change their-
motion and second on that?
Art made first, Jack made second. All votes are in. Voting closed.
And we'll get copies of the response.
Thank you.
And that carried unanimously.
It's done.
We posted a copy on the bulletin board outside for the public to look at. and
Perfect. Okay,
It's posted on the website.
okay. It's posted on the website and it's outside.
And Mayor, if I can then jump to item number 9, the request simply would be, at some point in the near future, to hold a workshop to talk about the Cal Water issue and talk about directions.
Sure. So this really is just a request for direction to maybe have a workshop on the Cal
Right.
Water report. So, Councilmember Del Rosario and Draper, did you hear that? To do a workshop? On the Cal Water? What? It means that you get together and, with no more than, 2 to 3 counselors, and the staff talks about a direction as opposed to handling it on the dais when we really can't do anything about it. Is that sufficient for Linda and Marlene?
Yes,
I'm sorry.
that's fine.
She said
I'm
yes.
sorry. We're
It's okay. Number 10, administration reports. Anybody?
Yes, several things. First one is the bridge inspection was requested. I provide a report. I called Caltrans the next day.
Right.
They said they had and they will continue to. The other issue, though, is agenda numbering, and several council members have requested to go back to the old format. This is a council issue. It's not a staff issue, so it's however you'd like it to be arranged. We just need direction. So let us know, please.
I'd love to go back to the old way.
Right.
All those little sticky notes are what I've resorted to, trying to keep track of where things are now, and it was just a lot easier
So
for
is
me.
that acceptable?
Yeah,
Council?
I actually think
Okay.
the 1 through
Done.
20 just works great.
Done.
Thank you.
It's hard to teach old dogs new tricks.
I'm sorry, Joanne.
That's
Okay,
that's it
moving
for
on.
administration.
Although LAFCO has a really nice. What?
What I find is whatever you're used to.
Yeah.
Everybody does it differently.
Item number 11, correspondence is attached. Anybody have any questions on the correspondence? Seeing none, this meeting will be adjourned.
Oh, we didn't ask.
Oh, no, wait, go ahead. This meeting is not adjourned.
We have reports up
Reports.
here. We didn't do that yet.
Council
We did,
reports.
we did administration, we didn't do our reports.
Okay, well,
I'm
we'll do
sorry.
reports then.
Okay, I attended on the 28th, Butte County air quality, and I have said this before, but I want to remind people that if you have an open fireplace, you are eligible to receive an insert and have it installed free if you are low income. So you have to apply to the air quality, the Butte County Air Quality Management Board. And I can give you that phone number if you need it. I also would like to say that while we have enjoyed the services of Scott Huber for a year of his 2-year contract, I am believing that at this time we should put out talk about ending the contract and obtain the services of a local attorney. I understand that it cost us $360,000 for his services last year, and we can hire a local attorney. That was part-time, and we can hire a local attorney for less than that amount, full-time. So I'm suggesting that we end that contract and search for a local attorney.
That would have to be placed on a future agenda for your discussion.
I'll be here second to have that on the agenda next time.
So there's 2 people that have requested another item on the agenda. Is there anybody else that has committee reports? And one of the things that actually came up was, we mentioned this over a month ago, that if we had the back-to-back meetings, if we were going to have a meeting on the 17th, it's the pleasure of the council, but I don't believe that there's any business. I don't believe there's any business coming up that is necessary.
That's correct. At this point, we were going to recommend we go to the August meeting, which I believe is August 7th.
So at that August meeting, is that when the second hearing will happen for the tax initiative? And does it give us enough time?
There is no second hearing.
There's no second hearing?
No,
Oh, okay.
it was July. This is it.
Yeah, correct.
Deadline.
You only need to adopt the resolution and ordinance at one meeting because it goes to the voters. You don't really have to do a second
Got it. So I misspoke earlier. I thought it had to come back twice. It goes to the voters.
July.
So.
They will have their public hearing on it.
Yeah, you'll have your public hearing on that in November.
November 6th, yes.
So we're not going to have, the pleasure of the council, are we not going to have a meeting on the 17th and take actually a little summer break?
Sounds good to me.
Because I'm actually going to be out of town but I'm going to be out of town on the 2nd.
That'd actually save our city some money, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So do we need to vote on that?
Just direction.
Direction, okay. So I know you guys love us and miss us when we're not here, but we're taking the 17th off. Is there any more committee reports from council members? Anybody?
Oh, God.
I intended to, but I'm not going to get into it.
Yes.
Yeah, I was at a meeting as well.
Thank you. All right, so can I adjourn this meeting?
No, ma'am, I got a couple things I need to cover.
Wait.
That's awesome.
Nice try.
Safe.
Marlene, do you need a ride?
I'll be quick, less than 5 minutes. Just some things I need to update you on quickly.
Less than 5 minutes?
Less than 5 minutes, I promise. One of the things that I need to update you and the community on is that the trees on Robinson Street at the corner of Robinson and Myers are going to be removed.
Good.
There's 3 trees down there. There was an incident this last week where a limb fell and struck a car. It's the second time that we're aware of where large limbs are falling out of those trees. We are working with the city forester or the city arborist to replace those. We're going to be using larger size trees to put in there to replace the ones that are coming out. The trees are they're unfortunately they're beautiful, however they're not planted properly and they are causing damage to vehicles, and the concern is they're going to cause damage or seriously injure somebody with a large limb falling out of them. So we're going to start working on that plan over the next couple years. It's going to take to replace those in that area, to replace the trees that are down there.
It's going to take 2 years to replace those trees?
Yeah, because we don't want to go through and just cut everything down and put little sticks in the ground and, and then wait for those to grow. What we want to do is take them out strategically, put in larger trees, let those take and grow a bit, and then remove another one, and just pick the ones that are the worst first and start replacing those, so that, we don't want to create a big issue in the community by removing some trees out of there. Okay. you know, there was a few other things that I needed to cover with you, but if anybody can, you know, it's getting late and I'm getting tired, so if you could throw me a hint.
Chief, we've been here till after 12 before.
Well, I usually go to
More
bed
than one time.
by 9:15. I'm usually asleep.
It's
So
his bedtime. It's past his bedtime.
Okay.
you have to bear with me. I'm sorry. There was that I needed to notify you of that was going on in the city. Dang it. It's any,
Tonight's shooting?
No, not that.
Can you help with that?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I mean, if there's something, a council meeting, we've already covered that. There's not going to be the necessity to have one on the 17th.
Okay.
So we are going to move to the 3rd of July or whatever the.
It's
I believe
actually
it's
August 7th.
Okay.
August 7th.
On August 7th, I'd like to remind the council that that's going to be the National Night Out. We'd like to keep the agenda light that night and then adjourn as early as possible and attend the National Night Out at the Municipal Auditorium. And then between now and the 7th of July, I'll remember what I was, everything that I needed to talk about, and we'll cover it then.
So you could actually send us an email if you if you
Yes.
wanted to. Okay, so now can I, Ruth, do you have anything? Anybody else? Okay.
Oh, I know what it is, Mayor.
What?
I'm sorry.
Oh my heaven.
One additional thing that it is important that we do cover this just real quickly. There's been some circulation of some information around town that that a permit was not issued for the removal of the buildings over by the hospital, the houses that were over there for the construction of the new hospital. What I have in my hand is a copy of the entire packet of that. It includes the demolition permit for the removal of the buildings that were over there. It is the entire process that we went through to do that. I welcome you to take a look at it. The process that we'll be following from there is once the next demolition permit will be issued, will be for half of the Olive Pharmacy building. That will be removed out of there. Once that's removed and we get the clearance from that the hospital is ready to go, we'll be issuing permits to move the oxygen farm. The oxygen farm will then be moved. The final structure permits are now still currently with OSHPD. Once those come back and they're approved, they'll go through our approval process and they'll do that. So we have followed our processes. Permits were issued. We have done everything that we needed to do. Fees were collected. The reason why I'm not just handing these out to everybody is because it's a third party that pulls the permits, who is a local contractor that has their information on. I'm not sure they want that floated around to everybody, but I do encourage you, if there is some question about that, please take a look at it. Nothing improper was done. You know, I'm not sure where that come from or how it come about.
Thank you, Chief. And just for the record, I'm the one that requested the Chief give us a brief and an update on the Oroville expansion project, permits, etc. And so I appreciate that. Now we're all up to speed.
Yep. We have Gary. Gary was here. Gary is staying on top of it. So thank you.
Okay, anything else?
Yeah, sure.
Okay,
Are we able to get that utility tax on the next agenda?
My suggestion would be, based on the National Night Out, that you do it the mid-August meeting. Again, there is absolutely no urgency to it as long as you get it well in advance of voter education going out.
So, and I'm going to be on vacation on the 7th, so I will not be here. So if you want everybody here.
In my opinion, that's fine. Move it to
21st.
Okay. Anybody else? This meeting is adjourned. The next regularly scheduled meeting that we will be here for is August 7th.
Wow, that was pretty quick. That was quick. I thought you wanted to say something. I was going, public hearing. That was good.
Okay, that's what I was worried about. Thank you. Thank you.
And I need you to sign the utility tax tonight. Somebody should have moved at that conversation. No. Actually, he's done what they're supposed to do. Thank you, Derek. Oh, God.
Yep, that's what we're doing right now. And I can give, do you want to take one with you? I don't think you don't have, no, just have Tom get get that one to Tom, and did you need to take one with you? I just need to get it to the county tomorrow.
Yeah, yes.
To the foreman of the grand jury.
Yeah, get it to the judge.
Okay. And do you want to take a signed copy with you? We made 3 copies. Okay, so have Tom sign that one too. Thank you. That was kind of confusing.
It's going to be an interesting. I got how to do it all by myself.
Pretty easy. It's just you take that measure text out and put this stuff.
Like
we're going to approve that.
I hear one of your I'm sorry. Yeah. He did.
And then you're okay with how we stated for the record how everything's going to be amended, the measure text, and then just strike the 6 years, and then you approve it, and then I'll take it to Marissa, and then I'll take it to you for signature. Sure.
Please.
You have my email address.
dcole@codacole. Decole. Yeah. On Thursday? What?
You're going to bring
We're-
stuff to me